three matters. So with that, unless we have Mr. Clifford or someone on Mr. Clifford's behalf to speak on behalf of that, we will simply take the request on its face and we will have a vote. Does anyone wish to be heard on the request for continuance from the applicant side? Seeing no hands, I will. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to continue 156 State Street, the dimensional variance special permit for non-conformities and special permit to our January 11th meeting of next year.
Second, Ken Swanton.
Thank you. Motion's made by Mr. Moore, seconded by Mr. Swanton. Calling the roll on the motion to continue to January 11th, 2022. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Lyle. Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries. That application is continued to January 11th, 2022. With that, we'll move to our first public hearing that's going forward this evening. This is the application by Ray Kingman, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman, and Costa. The applications for the property address of 10 75th Street on Plum Island. It's continued from the hearing date of December 14th, 2021. This is a application to remove the pre-existing non-conforming home and construct a new single-family home on the property. Attorney Mead, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on behalf of the applicant, for the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman, Costa on 30 Green Street in Newburyport. With me this evening, figuratively speaking, is Ray Kingman, the owner of the property, and Ray Barnard, who is the architect on the property of Benjamin Nutter Architects as well. I might remind the board that this actually didn't open at the last meeting because there had been I believe an advertising error or something of that nature. So this will be the first night of this hearing. If you go to the next slide, please, Caitlin. So the applicant's property is at 10 75th Street. Mr. Kingman proposes to remove the pre-existing non-conforming home in addition to the garage and construct a new single-family home on the property without a garage. To say this is out of necessity is an understatement. The applicant has received the authorization from the Historic Commission to demolish the home. The property is in the R3 zoning district, or the Plum Island Overlay District, and was built around 1930. There's a single-family home currently on the property with 2 bedrooms. The lot is non-conforming for lot area. It has 5,034 square feet where 12,000 are required. Frontage of 65 feet where 120 feet are required. The home goes over the front lot line by 5.5 feet where the required setback from the front property line is 20 feet. Left side setback is at 4 where the requirement is 20. The lot has 21% lot coverage where 21% is required, and has an FAR 0.358 or 0.25 is required. And you can go to the next slide, please. So as you can see on this, on the left-hand side is the existing conditions. You can see where the home goes over the property line into 75th Street. Of course, the paved area of 75th Street is much more narrow, as is not uncommon on the island, but the property, the structure does go over the front lot line. You see the driveway with the garage on the left of the structure. On the right, we'll go over this in a little bit, but you can just see how we pull the house back into the property. We remove the garage, pull it away from the left side lot line as well. Next slide, please. So this is the existing architectural drawings of the property. So here's the north elevation. In the next slide, you can see the south elevation. And the next slide is the existing west elevation. As you can see from all of these, this house is a traditional Plum Island cottage that has been expanded and added onto over the years. It's built right into the sand, certainly not in conformance with current construction standards. Next slide, please. And here's the existing east elevation. We're going to look at that a little more closely in some photographs coming up. And the next slide just shows the existing garage. So at the last storm that we had, when the island received significant damage near Reservation Terrace, these slides we're going to go through in a minute will show how that occurred. So here's a photograph. Next slide, please. the existing structure from 75th Street. To the left would be the next house, which is 12 75th, and then you've got the beach. So to the right and down the street would be to Northern Boulevard. Next slide, please. And so here's a shot from across the street looking at the house. Next slide, please. And then on the opposite side, next slide, please. And again, from the back of the house looking to the north or west, actually, I guess. Next slide, please. And then the storm came. So you can see the bottom part of the house is fully engulfed in water. Next slide. And that's that side entry where the door is open and the inside first floor has filled with sand. Next slide, please. And you can see the deposit as the tide starts to recede. Next slide, please. And now the elevation around the house has changed, and the sand actually on one side of the house has been deposited halfway up the first floor. Next slide, please. You go to the next slide, please. And you can see there's actually a piece of equipment there the city had out there for emergency purposes. And you can see the water receding. Next slide, please. And this is the last shot we have. Shortly after this storm, the building inspector went out and determined that the structure was uninhabitable, must not be occupied. There's no means of practically servicing or maintaining the equipment such as the hot water heater, furnace, and electrical systems. And he deemed the house uninhabitable. As I noted earlier, the Historic Commission has released a demolition delay on a structure to allow the structure to be removed and a new structure to be constructed. To that end, the next slide, please. The new home will be only a single family home. The garage won't be on the property. The house is moved to 1.7 foot inside the front yard, and where 20 feet are required. That improves over the 5.5 foot over the front yard. There will be 23.8 foot on the right side, where currently there is 4 feet where the garage is going to be removed. There's going to be 10.1 feet on the left side, where the requirement is 20, but that's currently 4, so that will be improved. The rear yard setback will be at 27.4, where 20 is required, so that will be in conformance. Lot coverage is the only thing that intensifies a little bit, and that will be at 21.1, where it's currently at 21. The open space is at 60.4%, where 35% minimum is required. And the building height is 34.5 feet based upon the fact that that will be put up on pilings. And the FAR is slightly reduced, and it goes down to 0.319, where it's currently at 0.358. The existing structure has 2 bedrooms. This proposed structure will have 3, which is allowed under the PIOD. And with that, I want to turn it over to, if you can go to the next slide, please, we have the site plan again. So you can see, as I said earlier on this previous slide, you can see how the house moves into the lot closer to the center. A lot of the location of the structure is due to conservation reasons that we're going to need to preserve in the back of the house, in the where the dune grass and things like that are. So that's why we're not pushing it back more onto the property, but we are bringing it into the lot line and 1.7 feet from the front. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ray to go over his proposed architectural drawings. Rick, to go over the proposed architectural drawings.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, my name is Rick Bernard from Benjamin Nutter Architects. We've been working with Mr. Kingman on the design of a new house for him to replace the existing house that Lisa just outlined. Can you go to the next slide, please? I'll just briefly talk about the elevations for the proposed. Mr. Kingman would like a house that seems traditional to Plum Island in the area. The intent was a sort of coastal adaptation of, I guess what people would consider a Cape style. This would be the north side, so this is the side facing 75th Street. Next slide, please. This would be the west side, so this would be his driveway side. As Lisa mentioned, he no longer wants and we don't want to try to have a garage in this area, so we are adapting the footprint of the existing house and garage to take advantage of that as much as we can in the new design. So really not expanding or intending to expand the footprint of the new house, just as Lisa mentioned, relocate it as best as we can within the site. Next slide, please. This is the south elevation. This will have an access to deck, as you can see here. The main living spaces would be on the kind of first floor, which is elevated above the ground. The first floor actually is roughly 22, elevation 22, so it's about 13 feet above the ground. And as Lisa mentioned, so the house can be built on piers. Next slide, please. And this would be the east side elevation, so this would be the side closest to the ocean and beach. Next slide, please. We have a few three-dimensional renderings to show the depiction of the proposed house, as well as the neighbor's house, which is the house shown in back between this property and the ocean. So these are a couple of views. The lower left view is as you approach from 75th Street, and the upper right view is sort of the south west corner of the house. Next slide, please. And a couple more views. The bottom left is from the north. So you'd be sort of looking towards down 75th Street at the house, and the upper right being the close to an east view if you were standing on the beach looking back.
Thank you, Rick. So as this board knows, the standard for special permit for nonconformities on the island is whether or not the proposed construction is substantially more detrimental to not only the neighborhood, but the PIOD. Here, considering the present situation, the current structure in the property, it's our position the proposed new structure is surely not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or the PIOD, as the term substantially means to a great or significant extent. The existing structure is damaged and was determined to be uninhabitable. It's proven not to be flood resistant and will be prone to further damage if it's not removed. In fact, this problem has occurred numerous times over the last several years, but this has been the worst. The very purpose of the PIOD includes reducing damage to persons and property associated with flooding and cleanup thereafter. In place of the existing structure will be a new structure built to code, raised off the ground and on pilings, which will allow the movement of the dune and water and sand. It will be more flood resistant structure and will cause no further stress on the surrounding neighborhood or the PIOD generally. In fact, it will improve the current situation and be much more in line with the PIOD. The proposal will also be more dimensionally compliant. And while the structure will retain some of its nonconformities, they have all been improved. The front yard setback, as I noted earlier, which is currently 5 foot encroachment over the property boundary, will be moved away from 75th Street and onto the lot by 1.7 feet. The left side yard will be improved to 10.1 feet. The FAR is improved from 0.358 to 0.319. And the one nonconformity that's not improved is lot coverage, and that's only an increase of 0.1%. The applicant has also received letters of support, importantly from the house directly beside him on either side, both 12 75th Street as well as 8 75th Street, and the neighbor directly across the street at 9 75th Street. You should have those all in your files, hopefully. With that, we'd ask the board to approve a special permit for nonconformities for the proposed reconstruction of this home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Attorney Mead, for the presentation. We will go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing and go to public comments. And if I can ask Andy to go ahead and put up our public comment slide, and members of those folks, members of our community that are in attendance, just take a look at the public comment slide. It's just a reiteration of what I described at the outset. And so with that, I will look for any show of hands. Does anyone wish to speak in connection with this application, whether for or against? Please just raise your hand at the bottom of the screen and I will recognize you and you can speak your mind. Seeing no hands, going once, going twice. Okay, I don't see any hands for the public comment. We'll go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing and go to questions from the board. Why don't we begin with Mr. Moore? Questions for the applicant.
Thank you, Chairman. I just had a couple of questions to kick off with. And one was, I saw from and it was mentioned in the presentation that the first floor, I think, will be 13 feet above, so above flood level. And I know this is by code, it has to be a certain height. So it's a little over 4 feet to the level of the mechanical space, and then up with approximately another 9 feet to where the first floor is going to be. Is that how this?
Yeah, the habitable area, and certainly Rick, you should pop in here, but the habitable area has to be, I believe, 2 feet above the flood plain. Is that correct, Rick?
Actually, the lowest portion of the structure. So if
There
you
you go.
have the lowest floor being sort of the mechanical space,
Okay.
then you have to account for the structure of the floor plus any supports under the floor. So where, you know, the mechanical space, by the time you include floor structure and thickness, is maybe something like 5.5 feet tall. And that's to try to raise as much mechanicals as we can, obviously above ground, and protect them, and also try to protect them from the weather, of course. So
Right.
that's kind of why that first floor is elevated to the point that it is.
All right. And then for the enclosure for that space, is that construction designed to be sturdy? Is it designed to break away? How does it handle flood waters, I guess is the question.
Sure. If the flood waters were to reach that elevation, we've investigated breakaway options, but we kind of concerned about those becoming objects that then could damage someone else's property. So we would usually employ more of a louvered type of system that if water could enter, it would also release, so it's not adding extra pressure against the sidewalls.
Okay, fair enough. And other than, you know, that consideration, and obviously having it on pilings, you know, by requirement, are there any other storm resistant construction materials that are used for the new home?
Well, yeah, I mean, we would meet the code requirements for anything regarding, windows for design pressures and wind loading. The piers and pilings likely would be a steel piling, because I think from previous experience on there, these generally end up about 30 feet into the ground. So it's intended to resist the type of storm and erosion that's been happening in sand deposits. Above the platform, we meet all the requirements for shear resistance, whether it means steel bracing in the walls, or there's different shear resistant panels that would anchor down to the piling system. But yeah, I mean, it should meet all of meet all the requirements. We've talked about materials trying to be a little more resistant, whether they're a composite material versus a wood material that over time can damage or rot more in this environment from the outside anyways.
Okay, thank you. No questions, no further questions for me right now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
I have a few questions also. one question sort of following up on Mr. Moore, and it looks from the drawings that the answer to this question will be no, but just to confirm, the intent of the space under the structure is not for garage parking or anything like that. Is that correct?
Correct. We have not intended for any parking space below the structure. And most of that because of trying to create this mechanical space, and the few portions of the house that don't have mechanical space wouldn't be large enough to park a vehicle underneath.
And the existing garage, I think I picked up from Attorney Mead's presentation that the existing garage is going away.
Correct.
Okay. Then the final question I have is, have you had to go to the Conservation Commission yet, or are you in process for this project?
Sure, I can answer that, Mr. Delisle.
Thank you.
It has not been filed. It will be filed beginning in January to be on the first meeting in February. There's been some work to be done out there. I don't know if you know this, across the street, the city is putting in some, I'm not sure what they called. Andy might be able to address it, but so our consultant, Tom Hughes, has been working with Julia relative to what they want to see for elevations on the sand and whatnot on this property. So it will be going to the Conservation Commission the first part of February.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me. Thanks.
Very good. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah. So I took a ride out and looked at this, and I can't tell you, the pictures don't do it justice. I mean, it's there's a lot of sand everywhere. It's like building on a dune. You know, the sand on the big house and between this and the beach has all now filled up underneath of it, up, you know, touching the floor and stuff. And it's. I was afraid to drive there on the road. I didn't realize it was paved under there somewhere. I just saw lots of sand everywhere. So I understand the need to do something here. I get it. I'd like you, if you could please explain to me the FAR calculations here. You know, this is a very sensitive area, and I realize you're above the FAR limit now, and you're proposing to improve it, but I'm wondering how much of that's the garage. Is there some place where you have showed how you came up with the 0.358 now and the 0.319 that you're proposing?
I'll have Rick answer that, but that was certainly provided to Jennifer, Mr. Swanton. But Rick, I don't know if you want to address that.
Sure. And I'm trying to, could we go up to slide 21, please? Yeah, it's probably going to be too small to see. But we can sort of use this for reference. So the existing home area was calculated at, I believe it was around 1,800 square feet for the first and second floor. And based on the way the design has worked with Mr. Kingman, the new home actually is a smaller finished living area based on the way the design has evolved. So the new home is proposed, I believe it was a little over 1,600 square feet. And the existing FAR, I believe, was calculated by Everett. So I'm not sure I can speak to whether or not he used the garage or how much of the garage calculated into that FAR calculation for existing.
How big is the, I mean, typically Jennifer's been including garages. How big is the garage that's currently there?
I can tell you in 1 second. The garage is about 13 by 20'6" roughly.
And so you're
That's-
saying, I'm sorry, keep going.
I was gonna say, so that's almost 267 square feet.
267, okay. And so you're saying the existing house is 1,800 square feet on its combined first and second floor, or is that for each floor?
That's combined.
Combined, okay. So you're going from an 1,800 square foot house to a 1,600 square foot house
Correct.
and eliminating the garage, which is why you say it's getting down to 0.319. Normally I am particularly concerned about FAR on Plum Island because, we have to assess what is more detrimental to the PIOD, and high density is one of the things that we can consider. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, you're going to all this work to completely rebuild this house. Why not fit it in within the density level of 0.25 FAR?
Well, because the applicant has the right to, it's pre-existing non-conforming, so it quite frankly could make it worse, which it's not doing. But he would like to have the space, having lost the garage space. So, he's attempting to do what he can do to have a structure that continues to meet his needs, but stay within the current confines.
I hear your answer. I have no more questions.
Very good. Moving on, we have Mr. Bennett.
Just want to make sure I understood. You said the existing structure, excluding the garage, is just simply the residence space itself has livable area of 1,800 feet.
Well, I want to interrupt here. So what?
Wait, I would like my question answered before you interrupt, please.
No, I was interrupting.
Chairman, I have a question. Council can respond when she wants. I think I'm entitled to have the answer to my question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, can you just repeat your question again? Well, let's just
I
reset.
would like to know what the square foot area of the existing structure is, not including the garage.
Attorney Mead.
Thank you. I was only correcting insofar as Mr. Bennett had said livable area, and the definition of FAR is not livable area.
I didn't make any reference to
Right.
FAR.
Right. Okay. So I'm looking at the assessor's card, and Rick, you can chime in here because you and Everett did the calculations, but the assessor's card would have those items, first floor, attic, and basement unfinished at 14, it would have it at 2,000 square feet, just over 2,000 square feet, which is less than that because you don't have the 6-foot height on either side of the attic. So I don't have the measurements, but Rick, do you have those handy?
The existing house, not including the garage, first and second floor combined, is about 1,530 square feet.
Okay. And what would be the comparable measure for the proposed structure?
The proposed structure is 1,608 square feet.
Is the proposed structure larger than the current structure? It's a very simple question.
It is equal to the combined house and garage.
Excluding the garage, please.
Yeah, 78 square feet larger, Mr. Bennett.
Okay, thank you. Are you adding a bathroom to this new structure?
There will be, trying to think, the existing we may be adding a half bath. The existing house had two full baths.
And you're adding 1/2 bath?
No.
Correct.
Yes?
Yep.
I didn't hear you.
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Any other members of the ZBA with any further questions? I hadn't gone yet, but I believe any questions I had were addressed in the comments.
I have a follow-up question.
Please.
This is
Mr. Swanton.
Ken Swanton. I got lost here. I thought Mr. Bennett asked some great questions, but I thought the answers were different than what I was told, so I'm confused. I thought I was told that the house was currently 1,800 square feet, not counting the garage, and now it's going to be 1,600 feet, and I thought he was told something different, so I'm lost.
Rick, can you repeat the square footage of the existing structure?
Sure, and I apologize for the confusion. The existing house is about 1,530 square feet, and the existing garage is about 267 square feet. And the proposed house is 1,608 square feet.
Okay, so now if I do the math and compare that to the 5,034 square foot for the lot, would I come out with exactly the FARs that you have shown on your little table here that's currently shown?
If I could, Mr. Swanton, it's pretty darn close. The 1,530 and 267 divided by that is 3569, 0.3569. So again, I'm just doing this without the actual measurements, but that's 3569. And then the other
Okay,
is,
I just did it too. I get
Yeah.
it.
yeah,
So, all right, so I was confused. I thought the house was actually getting smaller, and I think I applaud Mr. Bennett for getting to the bottom of this. It's apparently getting larger. And so I thank you, because frankly, I just didn't understand. I wish these FAR calculations, I realize you may show them the details to Jennifer, but a lot of us want to know too. And it takes our time in these meetings to try to figure it out. No big deal. I'm just saying for the future, it'd be nice to not have to go through this in front of everybody.
okay. I think the point's well taken. So the house is 78 square feet larger than the existing structure, the existing house.
Right, I get it. So just to complete this little analysis, if you wanted to fit within the 0.25 FAR, as some houses do on Plum Island, I'm just wondering how small the house would have to be 25% of 5034, I guess. It's kind of that simple. Equals divided by 4. It'd be 1,258 square feet. All right, just so I have some sense of what we're talking about here. All right, thank you very much for getting back, and I thank you, Mr. Bennett, for kind of smoking that out.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. Bennett and Mr. Swanton. Any other questions from members of the ZBA before I move on? All right, closing that portion of the public hearing, we'll now go into deliberations. And as this board knows, we're deliberating the application, of course, as a special permit. As you can see, we have basically a special permit for non-conformities, and we just need to tailor our deliberations around the legal criteria for a special permit for non-conformities on findings. So with that, let's go into deliberations, and I'll begin with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, to kick it off, as we know, the board has to find that the change will not cause the structure to be within 10 feet of the side lot line, more than 2 stories, or more than 35 feet in height. And as the plans show, this change will not cause the structure to be within 10 feet of the side lot lines. And the residence will be 2 stories and under 34.5 feet. Obviously, the profile changes because it will be up on pilings as would be required. But the structure as it exists now is uninhabitable, in more of a danger from the next storm that may come through than what's going to be built to code and built to withstand. So the fact that the new structure is a little bit larger and it's negligible from a living space standpoint in my mind, given that the garage was removed, which also cuts down on damage from storm. And taking the FAR at face value, it's improved by 11% in totality of the changes. Because I don't see that this new structure is going to be more substantially detrimental to the PIOD or the neighborhood than what's currently there. So as presented, I can support it.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under the circumstances here, I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Moore. We have a structure that is halfway under a dune at this point. It's not a livable structure currently. Something needs to be done. It seems like this plan makes a lot of sense for me. I think the tolerances are close here. So I, like Mr. Moore, can support this project.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah. Other projects on Plum Island, I think we have some tonight that fit within the FAR. I don't have a big deal with, but this one, when you're taking a house down completely, as this one has to be, given where it is and the sand that's piling up around the neighborhood, rebuilding it above the density guideline. We have density issues in the historic neighborhood, but this is even dicier. And this is one of the most dicey places I've seen, given what I witnessed when I went out there. So I have a hard time rebuilding from scratch at a FAR that's at 31.9% when the guideline is 25. So I can't support this. I think it's more detrimental to the PIAD as a whole to allow these kinds of reconstructions at that density level.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Bennick.
Yeah, this raises some very significant issues to me beyond this application. And I've been trying to gather guidance from the PIAD and find the guidance schizophrenic at best. At the outset, the PIAD states that its purpose is to limit the expansion of non-conforming single and double family homes. I take that as a significant direction and to the zoning board. Then, the PIAD goes on and it does provide for reconstruction and rebuilding of structures damaged by catastrophe, which I take this would be one. However, the by right construction is limited to essentially what you had there before. So that's another strong indication, I suspect, from the crafters of this, that would be the preferred way. And then it provides at last for the zoning board to permit us to grant a special permit for non-conformities and actually to add an additional bedroom in those instances. So what we have is a destroyed and demolished home structure, which I will state this: I don't believe that one buys property out there at their peril, and if it's destroyed by a storm, that may be your tough luck. So I don't think you have. I have no sympathy in this regard with respect to people who complain about that, particularly when their insurance is subsidized by the general public. But putting that aside, I guess what we have here is a larger house by a nominal amount, 78 square feet. We have one more bedroom, and we have an additional half bath. Everything else is fine about this. It's a very handsome design. I like it, but I am deeply troubled by the direction that we have been given in the PIAD here. And I fear what we are doing. I mean, this is mission creep in a way. I mean, we're approving these. I don't think we've been very reluctant not to. And but I am going to announce that from here on in, if there is an expansion by way of a bedroom or a bathroom, I will vote against it because I will take the direction as to what the purpose of the PIAD is And I think we are skirting that overarching purpose by using these special permits for nonconformities. And unless we get greater, more specific, crisper direction, that will be my way in which I'm going to deal with these after tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. So, my thinking on this, and with the greatest respect to my colleagues who I've had the pleasure of working with for a long time now, and in particular, the disparate points of view, I have a great deal of respect for. I'll say this, we have to take with a very, we have to take with great caution the language of our PIOD and run it through the lens of ourselves. I think that we have this stricture for a reason, and I agree with my colleagues who have shared their sort of more strict construction view about that, as well as my colleagues that have shared a more sort of discretionary view and taken them case by case. I think we as a board, we're an appellate board. I think part of our charge, and I'm self-cautioned about thinking of it this way, and I share it for what it's worth, not to try to sway my colleagues for or against, but to just sort of share it for what it's worth. The reason that we sit on a board like this is because we come from disparate points of view, and the goal here is that we create some alchemy of some common point of view that is flawed by its design. Why? Because we're all flawed by our design. So we have to take, I think, each and every one of these applications and drill into the granular case-by-case details. I think that's our mantle. For better or for worse, there is no macro that we can apply to any of this. I have toiled with and toyed with over the many years I've been on this board, trying to come up with a sort of a macro sensibility about what I'll do in this case and when I'll do it. And this is not to point any of my comments toward my distinguished colleague, Mr. Bennett, but whom I respect in his point of view. But when I think about this, I think that we are just doomed, if we choose to serve on a board like this, to take every one of these cases, case by case, to toil through and grind through every detail, and pardon the pun, every grain of sand. And in this situation, I think it's worthy of note that A, we have discretion. B, we may apply that discretion as we see is appropriate and responsible and credible under the stricture of the guidelines. Flawed or perhaps incomplete though they are guidelines. That is our ordinance. That is our sort of our Bible. But the reason we exist and the reason a robot doesn't sit in our place is that we are to take sort of the humanity of it and run it through that lens. And I think I'm trying to do that here. I cannot extricate myself personally from the reality of this sort of the human passion of what's gone on down in this part of Reservation Terrace. I happen to know this because I'm down there. My wife and I have a place down on closer to the point on Plum Island. So I think any one of us who live in this area or watch the news, we know what goes on. But as of late, that neighborhood, and I'll say this without sounding condescending intentionally, but those poor folks in that neighborhood have dealt with a lot. This is simply the latest thing. And maybe it's the first thing that some of us have come to sort of, see in our view. It is the umpteenth thing for them. This isn't the first time sands washed up 75th or 73rd or Reservation Terrace. It's not the first time hard equipment by the city or private or others have been down those streets, shoveling them out. To say that we're being asked to, that these applicants are going to have to demolish this house, I think is better fairly described. They have to dig this house out of the sand, versus knock it down. They have to dig it out. This is a situation where I think that I personally read a lot, and I'm moved by the sea level rise, that we are dealing with, as a permitting body that we must pay attention to, and looking forward into the 50 years that are to come, we have to lean into what's happening down there. The homes that do exist, though they may have chosen to be there, like everyone else in many places on this planet, and certainly in our neck of the woods, we're dealing with a change in climate, it seems, that are changing a lot of the rules of the road and the rules of the margins of those roads, and the sea, where the sea meets the road in particular, is changing. I think that abiding by taking a property that is non-conforming in many ways, not the least of which is adherence to FEMA performance standards, and allowing it to comply, is us as a board being responsible not just to the now, but to the 50 years from now, as best we can, to lean into, what do? Do we simply just shut it and lock a door? And everyone who happens to be on the wrong side of the ship, you don't get a lifeboat. I caution myself to try to never allow myself to, to succumb to that thinking, though I often fail in doing so. So I just say out loud, for the benefit of maybe just myself, but for all of my colleagues, with the greatest respect, I can support this application because I'm moved by the totality of these circumstances. I would love to find a macro that allows me to just stamp yes or no when things either sort of breach the barrier or they fall short of it. I haven't found one yet. And I've been on this board, and I can't believe I say this out loud, but I've been on this board a long time. This is my 20th year. I've had the privilege of serving on this board. I haven't yet found that macro, but I would just simply offer for my colleagues, and we'll see where all this goes, that we take the totality of these circumstances. I feel compelled to support it in spite of the extra 78 feet, because I see sort of a give and take with the loss of the garage. I simply cannot extricate myself from the humanity of this, the real boots on the ground or on the sand component, which is that lots has gone on that's led these folks here. We as a citizen board have a duty to be responsible to our fellow citizens, to the city council's stricture of the guidelines that govern us, and to ourselves and our personal sense of ethic about what we bring to these boards. I feel comfortable in this sort of a request, despite the slight increase, when I balance in everything. So, I simply wanted to say, that's why I feel the way I feel. I feel I can support it. I do recognize that it is a breach, but in the totality of what's being asked, I feel that it's I won't say de minimis, but it is certainly small enough for me to apply discretion and feel still comfortable and credible in supporting an application like this. So I just share that for what it's worth, as I do the criteria.
Mr. Chair, if I just need to offer a correction that we put forward earlier.
Sure.
Mr. Bennett asked about the bathrooms. The architect and the owner just texted me that, in fact, there continue to be 2 bathrooms. There is not a half bath. And so there is not an additional half bath. And the total amount of square footage, if you also remove the garage, to the chair's point, is being reduced, and the new building will be compliant with FEMA standards. So I just thought I would add that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead. I think we've all deliberated, and unless there's any further deliberations, I'm prepared to close deliberations and go to a vote unless there's anything further. Seeing no hands, I am going to go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing, and we can now go to a vote. Do we have a motion to approve the application?
I'll make a motion to approve special permit for non-conformities for 10 75th Street. That's ZNC-21-6.
Okay, and that's Mr. Moore. Motion.
Correct.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that. Stephen Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Motion's made by Mr. Moore, seconded by Mr. Delisle. Calling the roll. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
No.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett votes yes. Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That is 4 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries and the application is approved.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Mead, and thank you for everyone's patience and presentation. Thank you, members of the board, for your patience and questions. Okay, moving on to the next application on our agenda. We have bear with me a second. The application is 25 Basin Street, the application of Fred and Mary Ellen Venditti, care of Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa, LLC. The applicant seeks all necessary permits to construct a 1-story addition to the pre-existing non-conforming single-family home. I believe Attorney Mead is presenting on behalf of the applicant. Attorney Mead, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. For the record, Lisa Mead, Tellerman and Costa, 30 Green Street in Newburyport. With me this evening is Fred and Mary Ellen Venditti, and also Andy Sidford, who is the architect on the project. Next slide, please. So this property is located at 25 Basin Street. Fred and Mary Ellen proposed to construct a 1-story addition to the pre-existing non-conforming single-family home, which is located there. Again, the property is in the R3 zoning district in the Plum Island Overlay District. The home was built in around 1920. The applicant is not making any roofline changes, so there was no need to go to the Historic Commission. We are currently in front of the Conservation Commission. Conservation Commission has had a site walk and will be returning to the Conservation Commission next week or thereafter. It may be continued next week, but nonetheless, we're on the agenda for a return next week. The property has 75 feet of frontage where 120 are required, has a front setback of 18.9 where 20 feet are required, and a right side setback of 2.4 where 20 are required. Those are the non-conformities. There's also currently 2 bedrooms in the home. The property is otherwise conforming. It has 15,212 square feet of lot area where 12,000 square feet are required. It has a 23.1 left side setback where 20 is required, and an 89.4 foot rear yard setback where 20 feet is required. The lot coverage is 4.8% where 20% is the maximum. The building height is 22.3 where 35 is the maximum. And the minimum open space of 35%, and the lot has 81.9%. There are 2 parking spaces. The lot has room for at least 2 more parking spaces. And the maximum FAR is 0.25, and the property has an FAR of 0.14. Next slide, please. So on this plan, you can see the lot area, and the lot is a large lot because it goes down to the water and then up to the north, if you will, on this plan. So it actually includes probably 2.5 typical lots from on the Plum Island point of view. Currently, the gray rectangle on the right-hand side of this plan is the existing structure with the deck, the lighter pink, and Basin Street is the frontage on this property. We'll go over more of that in a minute. The proposed addition is a 1-story, 464 square foot addition. Next slide, please. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Andy to review the existing elevations before we get into the actual proposed conditions. Andy, you want to go through this sheet of elevations?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Andy Sidford. I'm an architect here in Newburyport, and I've been working with the Vendettis on this. On this page, you see the 4 elevations of the existing home. On the upper left is the streets, the rear side towards the water. And on the upper right is the elevation facing the street. On the lower sides are the 2 end elevations. The intent here was to add an elevation on the water side and pull the kitchen into that addition. And next slide, please. This is a section showing the original house, and the new addition has to conform with Concom regulations, so it had to be lifted, as was discussed in the last hearing. The bottom of structure had to be lifted above 2 feet above flood stage, which it does, which requires us to go up half a level. So next slide, please.
So I'll go over these proposed conditions.
sorry,
Andy.
thanks.
Yep, that's okay. And then you can review the architectural drawings. So
Great.
as I said a little bit ago, the proposal is to construct this 464 square foot addition. The left side setback will be at 22.4 and the rear setback will be at 58.7. So those continue to be conforming. Lot coverage will go to 7.6%. The building height will be, interestingly, it's a little bit higher at 22.6. The reason is that we gain 2 lower grades as we go out towards the water, and therefore the mean height rises a little bit, but it's certainly still well below the requirement. Open space will be at 80.6%, and the FAR will go to 0.17%, and the parking will remain. The existing structure has 2 bedrooms, but with the renovations, there will be a bedroom added, which is allowed under the PIOD specifically. And because we're changing the footprint, then we need to be here for a special permit for non-conformity. So Andy, you go over the next slides, which are your elevations.
sorry. So on the top is the elevation from the street side. There's some modest changes. We moved the entry from the right side over to the left, so it's closer to the parking, and we can make the interior a bit more efficient. The lower elevation shows the new addition on the right. It's a single story addition, but you can see it's raised above the elevation of the main house. And as Lisa mentioned, a little confusing part is that the addition is below the existing house and well below the allowable height, but the average height goes up a modest amount. And so we have some window changes, but again, the addition is the portion on the lower right section of the lower elevation. Next slide, please. This elevation, the upper elevation shows the original house is the two-story portion on the right. Then essentially where there's a dotted line in the center of that, that shows the new addition coming up that the kitchen will exist in. And you can also see the dotted lines showing the change in floor elevation. On the lower, you see again the two-story original house on the left section of the elevation, and on the right section is the addition extending out into the yard. I think that's about all I have, unless there are questions.
Now we'll go to the criteria. Next slide, please. So as we noted earlier, under the PIOD, a special permit for non-conformities is whether or not there will be a substantial detriment to the neighborhood and or to the PIOD. Here, the proposed addition is certainly not substantially more detrimental than the existing non-conforming structure to the neighborhood, we believe. There are no new non-conformities created, nor are any of the existing non-conformities extended or exacerbated. That is a relatively minor addition of 464 square feet. The existing conformities on the lot will remain conforming under the proposed addition, including there being a 7.6 lot coverage where 20% is the maximum, 80.6% open space, which is well above the 35% minimum, an FAR of 0.17, which is a small increase over the existing 0.14, and still well below the 0.25, which is the maximum FAR, and there will be sufficient off-street parking. The addition will also have to be built to code and raised off the ground on pilings. It will not be supported by the existing foundation. And this, of course, is essential because the property is located in the FEMA VE flood zone and located in the rear of the structure. The design addresses the current flood resiliency concerns that the PIOD asks us to do. No great stress will be placed upon the area of the PIOD because it will all be built consistent, allow the free movement of water and sand as is required under the PIOD and actually under the Conservation Commission requirements. And because the addition is being constructed within the requirements of the flood regulations and fully under the dimensional and intensity requirements of the PIOD, we believe the board can find that it's not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood or the PIOD than the existing conditions. We've also provided 7 letters of support or non-opposition from 15 Basin, 21 Basin, 24 Basin, 28 Basin, 29 Basin, 31 Basin, and 33 Basin. And we'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Attorney Mead. Thank you, Mr. Sidford. We'll close that portion of the presentation portion of the public hearing, and we will go to public comment. With that, Andy, if you can go ahead and put the public comment slide up, and we will go ahead and begin to recognize anyone who wishes to speak in connection with this application. If you do, just please raise your hand by clicking the raise hand icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Let's see, giving it a few moments. I do not see any hands raised at the moment. We'll give it another moment or two, and after which I will go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing and go on to questions. Going once, going twice. Okay, I will close the public comment section of the public hearing, and we will go now to questions from the board, beginning with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one to ask up front, and I know we get the square footage of the addition off the back, but I wondered dimensionally, it looks like it's it's a rectangular shape. So how far out from the original structure towards the water? What is that? calculation? How long is that wall?
What's the length of the new addition, Andy?
Hold on a second. You have to give me a second to check on that.
Mr. Moore, was there any question that you
Well,
wanted to be?
It's gonna work off that, like, what is the width of the deck as well? And
Okay.
And that's
Then,
probably all I got.
If that's, if they're all interrelated, then we'll just give, we'll give Mr. Sid for a
Yep.
moment to pull that
Go
in.
real quick.
So if I just to clarify, while Andy's looking at that, Mr. Moore, the width of the proposed deck or the
No,
existing
The
deck?
the existing deck.
Okay.
You'll excuse me as I've got reductions on all these drawings. So I'm gonna have to guesstimate to a certain extent.
I'll tell you what, Andy, rather than us do that, why don't we give you a moment, and Mr. Moore, if we can, we'll just continue through the board. We'll circle
Sure.
back to your question, and that'll give Mr. Sidford time to pull that data.
Keep it moving.
I think we'd rather just have the, his best foot forward on that, on the calculus of that info. So with that, we'll circle back to Mr. Moore and Mr. Delisle. Any questions from you?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question for Mr. Sidford also, so I'd be happy to hold that until we circle back to him and let Mr. Swanton go from here.
Very good, Mr. Swanton.
Well, actually, this is a pretty big piece of land, a pretty small addition relative to it. I have no questions.
Very good. And Mr. Bennett.
I have no questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett and Mr. Swanton. Andy, how are you on the materials you were trying to pull up?
The addition is approximately 31 feet extending off the house.
I believe that was Mr. Moore's question, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
Sorry, Mr. Champetti, I'm guesstimating that the deck is somewhere about half that length, so 15, 16 feet. And
Very
the
good.
addition takes over some of the space of the original rear deck, as you
Right.
can see in the site plan.
I was just trying to get some idea of the ratio of that. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. Moore?
No, I'm good.
Very good, and we'll circle back to Mr. Swanton.
Oh, Mr. Delisle, but thank you.
Pardon me, yes, Mr. Delisle.
Mr. Sidford, I just wondered if you could just walk us through the materials to be used on the addition on the exterior.
Yeah, the addition is up on pilings, and the intent is to use the same siding materials as the house to blend it in as much as possible. And I mean, the intent of the design really was for it to be fairly modest exposure from the street and tuck around the corner. So the original siding will be carried around, the original profile and general intent of the windows is going to be carried on it. So all the materials will be intended to match the existing house. So, wood trim, cedar shingles, and typical oceanfront detailing.
Got it. Great. Thank you very much.
Certainly.
Okay, Andy, what the materials, are they going to be natural or is there going to be cementitious material? I'm not sure I understand what's existing. I know that it's intended to match, but I'm just curious.
I'm sure there's cedar shingles.
Cedar shakes or shingles.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay, great. Any other questions from the board?
And in terms of finish, they'll be intended to look the same as the original as well.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from members of the ZBA before we move on? Seeing none, we will close that portion of the public hearing and go into deliberations. And just as we were doing with the last application that was before us on Plum Island, 25 Basin Street, is an application for a special permit for nonconformity. So I'll ask the members of the ZBA to kindly tailor your deliberations around the criteria for special permit for nonconformities. And with that, we'll begin with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, given that as presented, the plans don't present any new non-conformities, I can certainly move on to the next, which is looking at pre-existing non-conforming use more detrimental to the PIOD, and it's a modest addition off the back of the house. I think you'd have to look for it, driving by it to find it where it's going to be situated. The lot certainly supports it. It doesn't in any way push the FAR anywhere near close maximum amount. So as presented, I can't find this being more substantially detrimental to the neighborhood or the PIOD, so I can support it.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree with Mr. Moore. I would just add that also I don't think that we're going to be within the 10 feet on either side, more than 2 stories or higher than 35 feet. So with that, I can also support this.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, even though sometimes I don't like seeing overly dense developments on Plum Island, this is not one of them. This lot is, over 15,000 square feet. It's like triple the size of the one we just looked at. So this, in the overall scheme of things, this addition and this resulting house is fairly modest and within the density guideline. And, it was said earlier, Plum Island's particularly tough. How do we come up with how to be fair about what affects the PIOD as a whole and what doesn't? And, I realize each one of them is different, but I do think the overall density of this fragile environment is really, really important. And in this particular one, it's not that dense, so I can support this application.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Bennett.
Given the facts and circumstances and the considerations outlined by my colleagues, I can support this application.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I share my colleague's sentiment. I think the applicant has met the criteria for a special permit for nonconformities, and I'm also moved by the fact that not only do we not see any opposition, and that is very, very rare in my experience on Plum Island applications. It usually speaks to the credibility of an application and the sensitivity to it, maybe the modesty of it. Moreover, in this instance, we have nothing but letters of support by those most impacted in terms of geography. We can argue that Plum Island impacts us all, right? But those most physically impacted geographically are the immediate abutters, and they all seem to be in support of it. So that is something that I also pay attention to, as is the case here. So I too can support it. Any further deliberations before we close? Seeing none, we'll close that portion of the public hearing. And do we have a motion to approve?
Mr. Moore, I'll make a motion to approve special permit for nonconformities for 25 Basin Street. That's application ZNC-21-7.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Do we have a second?
I'll second that. Stephen Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Motion's made by Mr. Moore and seconded by Mr. Delisle. Calling the roll. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Bennett.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the application for a special permit for nonconformities is approved. Thank you, Mr. Sidford, Attorney Mead, and thank you, members of the board.
Thank you very much.
Okay, moving to the next application on our agenda. This is the application by Mr. Brad Kutcher on the property address of 344 Merrimack Street. There's 2 matters before us. The applicant seeks all necessary permits, special permits for nonconformities, and relief from the Zoning Board of Appeal for a variance for lot area and rear yard setback, as well as a special permit for nonconformities on the expansion of a pre-existing non-conforming structure. With that, may we hear from the applicant? And I believe we have Mr. Nick Cracknell of Keystone on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Cracknell, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and other members of the Zoning Board of Appeals. I know you can see the screen. Can you see me? Maybe not. Doesn't matter.
We don't see you.
Okay, no problem. You can see the screen. So again, for the record, Nick Cracknell, I reside at 13 Picard Street in Amesbury across the river. I'm representing the applicant, Brad Kutcher, on this project, and by extension, the partnership of Sam and Michelle Kimball. What I'd like to do tonight is give you a fairly detailed but highly visual presentation here so we get a firm grasp on sort of the design approach we took on this project, some of the challenges from a design perspective that we tried to incorporate in the layout, and talk about our design goals for both the restoration of the existing house and the design of the proposed single family lower down on the lot at the intersection of Merrimack Court and Union Place. And I'd like to just skim across some of the other options that we evaluated with Sam and Michelle in respect to modifications to the current two-family use. And what one could do to improve the form and function of the existing structure, because I think what's not obvious to the viewer is the relative modesty in the size of the two condominium units that make up that existing building. So it's already a condominium. Sam and Michelle recently purchased the second unit and are renting it to the prior owner, but their intention is always been to be able to move forward with a project application like this. So I've got a healthy number of slides here, but I'm going to try and move quickly. I just really want to give you an accurate representation of the narrative that was built here. We've been working on this project for almost a year, myself with Sam and Michelle, before we've even got to you folks at the Board of Appeals, and it'll shed light on maybe why it's taken us that long. So next. If we look at the introductions, again, Brad is the builder. I've done at least 6 other projects in Newburyport in the last 10 years that Brad has been the builder for. And I think Brad was really an important partner to bring into this project for me. I think he's proven himself with Sam and Michelle that he's the right guy to be able to do this, come up with the right design, put the right team together, but most importantly, execute it in a manner that's consistent with not only this board's approval, but any other land use board that's going to look at this application should it proceed, and any commitments that have been made to any of the abutters or folks in the neighborhood that we routinely work with and collaborate with in making revisions as we go through the approval process. So the architect for this project will be Scott Brown. The house that we're proposing, most of you, if not all of you, know well at 3 Roads on Ferry Road and High Street. The cape that was built there about 4 years ago was built by Brad, designed by Scott, and permitted by me to do one of these 6C 2 single family structures on one lot. And I think, the evidence speaks for itself as to how well that fit into the neighborhood context. Lower on the list, John Hargraves did the site plan and the survey work for the project. And should we be successful in moving this project forward at some point towards the end of the process, Paul Gagliardi will work with me and the Historic Commission on a preservation restriction for the restoration of 344 Merrimack. And he'll have to make adjustments to the existing condo docks for the 2 units that currently reside in the structure. Next. Thanks, Kate. So we're here. Perhaps unlike the last 2 applications, we are looking for a special permit for nonconformities, but the bigger ask is the dimensional variances from what's needed to do a 6C application. Again, 6C is a special permit issued by the planning board, and it requires certain performance standards to be met, but the outcome is putting 2 single family structures on the same lot. And that's what we're moving towards. So we're trying to restore this historic structure that it's tired. It's got a lot of non-contributing alterations that have been made from a historical preservation standpoint. We want to convert it back to its original design as a single family house, not a 2-family. It's less than 2,500 square feet when you put of living area when you put the 2 units together. So it's not a mansion on High Street with 3 floors of living or a 40 by 40 foot foundation like a lot of other federal structures built about the same time in the city. So we're part of our approach is to have the single family use in this building, have the deeded preservation restriction, build the second single family structure there further back on the lot, have them read like they're separate lots, even though they're in a condominium association. So we're not asking for a lot split. We'd have about 12 variances to do that. But we want it to read like it was always there and rebuild that intersection with a structure in it, which would have been there at the turn of the last century. And then lastly, as part of the the collaborative approach we make with especially the direct abutters, we are more than willing to make offsite improvements to neighboring properties or utility improvements to those properties if it fits within the budget. This is really, like Bill Harris always used to tell me about my projects and how we approach them. It's really about baking a bigger pie and sharing the proceeds with the people that matter, this neighborhood, and making this neighborhood better than it is today. So one of the zoning amendment changes that occurred this spring, because we've been working on this for a year, is the dimensional requirement now that you need to meet the two-family minimum lot size, which in this case is 15,000 square feet, and we're about 1,180 square feet short of that, even though we already have a pre-existing non-conforming two-family use on the property. And the other, so that's why we need that variance now. We wouldn't have needed it a year ago. And the other thing we have to do now that we wouldn't have had to do a year ago was provide a payment to the Affordable Housing Trust, whether we want to or not. Nobody's been doing that because it wasn't a requirement. Now there's a requirement. I think it's $20 per square foot. We have roughly, it might be just shy of $40,000, but it's pretty damn close to that. And that's a requirement should we get the permit subsequent to you folks tonight. Our next stop would be the Historic Commission and the Planning Board. And if we get the 6C special permit, there's a requirement to make that payment to the Affordable Housing Trust. Next. So what's the design challenge? How do Sam and Michelle, in buying the second condominium unit in that structure, how do they modify the two-family structure to enhance the marketability of the existing units? And we think the project that we're presenting tonight is the best fit, is the best outcome, and represents the best possible solution for not only the Kimballs, but the abutters and the surrounding neighborhood to help rebuild that, what I'd call a couplet, the triangular set of streets that makes up this portion or this neighborhood. They need to provide, if they're going to market this property as a legitimate two-family condominium, there's room for it and there's a need for covered off-street parking. So I can show you some images of how that would work, but it's just not sellable. It's not preferred to sell a condominium unit without some covered parking, and there's ample room to do it both inside this project and something different. We've got to have usable outdoor space for the units. We need to finance the restoration, the full restoration of the exterior of that structure. I'm going to go through some of the non-contributing items as well as the repair items that add up to well in excess of $100,000 of improvements just on the skin of this building that need to be amateurized in whatever Sam and Michelle do moving forward. On the other side, we need to minimize parking, traffic, and drainage impacts on the surrounding neighborhood. So we've tried to be very sensitive as best we could with minimizing those impacts and trying, beyond that to make things better than they are today, not worse. And I'll talk about that as we go through this. We obviously want to maintain and, more importantly, enhance the historic character of this neighborhood. It's really about continuing the trend of what's happened here over the last 30 years, where incrementally this triangular neighborhood has, at least in our opinion, made significant strides of improvement to improve the quality, the value, and the character of that neighborhood. So we also, we hope as an indirect impact with this project to add considerable equity to the property values of the abutting properties by making a substantial investment, not only in the existing house, but in the quality and the character of the proposed house. Next. So again, we've been working on this for nearly a year. Sam and Michelle approached me in January. It could have been even December last year that I was originally approached. They were referred to me from somebody else in Newburyport. And what the first thing I did was help them put together a request for proposals. They didn't have a builder or a developer working with them. They haven't gone through this process before. They've only watched what their neighbor did in getting a 6C approval, and the house has recently been completed. But they've watched their neighborhood change. They've watched that project next door, and their intention was to follow a similar path, but they needed to find a suitable partner, someone that was going to give them a fair price for the condominium unit so they could build that single family house. But money was secondary to doing a good job and helping them also make the right decisions on their existing house in converting it back to a single family. So we went out and got 3 proposals. We selected Brad. That probably took us 2 to 3 months to interview at least 3 developers. And then Brad was selected. They had to work through a purchase and sale agreement. This property was surveyed. A preliminary site plan was put together. We looked at a number of building designs. The months rolled by, and it took us to September, early fall to put together a draft application. And I think I filed in November. This application that's before you, we've subsequently made a few adjustments that are included in this PowerPoint presentation, but they're pretty subtle changes, but important ones to improve, again, the outcome and the product that we're proposing. So we're here in December for the hearing at the Zoning Board of Appeals. If the project doesn't die a quick death tonight, we would file for the Historic Commission probably in February and actually develop a preservation restriction. That could take a couple of months. That's just when they start it in February. And the same with the planning board, opening a public hearing for the special permit for the 6C. Again, should we get there, that's going to take a couple of months. It's at least May, if not June, before we would be out the other side, should we get all those approvals, which is a big if. Next, please. So what are our goals? We're trying to, well, obviously maintain the existing 2-family use of the lot. So there's no asking for a 3rd unit. That, you know, about 8 years ago, there was a request to get a special permit for non-conformities to change this to a 3-family use. Some people remember that in the neighborhood. It was a giant house that was attached to the existing house with a really weak connector. It wasn't sympathetic to the existing architecture of not only the Levi Carr house, but anybody else on the street. So it was, I think, summarily denied and with a lot of neighborhood opposition. And I would say rightfully so, looking back at that building design. So this is not that. We're not asking for additional dwelling units with this application. We're simply transferring or relocating one from the existing house to the back of the lot. Restoration, this is a historic preservation project as much as it is rebuilding that intersection or anchoring it with that new house down towards Merrimack Court. So we want to provide obviously adequate access and parking from Union Place for both structures. We want to make sure the cars, not only during construction, aren't spilling over into the neighborhood, but when the project's done, the people that live in these 2 units that already exist on this property have plenty of off-street parking that there's no need to park on the street, even if they have a guest coming to their house. We want to preserve the existing mature elm tree that's in the backyard. It's on the property line with the abutting property where the new house was constructed. We want to keep that. We believe we can with where we place the house. We want to enhance the streetscape on all 3 streets from what's there today. We've gone out of our way to make sure the house design we chose for the new single family is as modest and squat as humanly possible. And that house is only 20 feet tall under zoning that's on Ferry Road, which we're proposing here. The maximum height in this district is 25. That happens to be exactly what the new house is. If you're down in the neighborhood that was just constructed next door, that is a 25-foot house to the mean of the ridge. It's about a 30-foot house at the ridge. And our house is going to be close to 25 feet at the ridge. But zoning measures the midpoint. So this is a very 1,900 square feet modest house like the one next door. It's not going to have a basement. It's going to have a crawl space. There's clearly high groundwater in that area. All the condos that were built at Courier Landing 25, 30 years ago, they're built on lowlands. A lot of people have sump pumps down there. And that's why, like Joel next door, we're not putting a basement in this home, but it's not going to be sitting in a bowl of water. We're going to convey an easement to the city. Again, should this work out with all the boards. Right now, part of Union Place is on Sam and Michelle's property, and the city recently paved it. They probably paved where it was before, but there's about 100 square feet or more of Union Place, which is already very tiny, that's on their property. So we'd like to clean that up and give the city at least an easement rather than the complicating factor of carving it off and getting a bunch of variances to do so. An easement will suffice. We want to retain water views for the abutting structure at 342 Merrimack, the one that just built the new home in the backyard, converted from a 2 to a single, same thing. They have a probably a seasonal view of the water from the upper story. That's going to remain here. So we have incorporated some stipulations that would run with the deeds to limit any future expansion into the view or any upward expansion of any of these buildings. We want to have a construction management plan so we can avoid some of the problems that may or may not have occurred next door when they built the single family house and didn't have enough off-street parking to support the contractors. We have enough room on Union Place to do that. We are proposing as a stipulation, we are required to prepare a construction management plan that deals with hours of operation, parking, toilets, dumpsters, the deliveries, all of that, so that people are not adversely impacted that live on Union Place or Merrimack Court. Lastly, it's really important for us to have quality assurance for making sure all the offsite agreements or commitments we've made to anybody that lives there are memorialized in any of these decisions. Next. So real quick on the existing conditions, you can see the red line that's 344 Merrimack Street. There's the triangular neighborhood. The street, the thin street on the top is Union Place. To the right is Merrimack Court, and to the bottom is Merrimack Street, which most of us use. There's a big, beautiful beech tree at the point of that triangle. There are a couple of two families and then a couple of singles, so 6 units in that triangle along Merrimack Street. And now there's one of the previous 3 single family structures that used to be on the south side of Merrimack Court that has found its way back into that landscape just recently with the 6C next door. So on this lot, it is unique. It fronts on 3 streets. It has 60 feet frontage on Merrimack, 243 on Union, and then 45 on Merrimack Court. It's in the Waterfront Marine District, and it's a 2-family residential. It's already a condominium, so it's not a rental. It's not just a 2-family rental apartment, and it has pre-existing non-conformities that it's had for a long time for lot area, front, side, and rear yard setbacks. It really doesn't have a side yard because it has 3 front yards. And then the driveway access and parking are off Union Place today, and that'll remain. Next, please. Okay, the existing site plan. This is in the application, but you can see I tried to highlight there. The existing house is obviously at the front, 344 Merrimack. It's a 2-family. There's a very wide driveway and curb cut on Union Place to get into a surface lot. There is no garage currently on the property for cars. There's a dilapidated shed structure that has a collapsed roof. You'll see an image of that in a minute. A small accessory building, a private yard to the right of the house if you're on Merrimack Street, and then the open lawn in the back, and the mature elm tree is shown there just inside the property line on Sam and Michelle's property. Next, please. So I already covered that. Those are the existing nonconformities that are already there. So next. Those are your 2 zoning districts. So Merrimack Street is the divide between the WMD and the R2. The R2 being a residential district in the north end of modest or moderate density. The Waterfront Marine District is primarily there to protect and encourage water-related or water-dependent uses. There obviously is the boatyard just next to this property in behind. You can see it at the top of the image. And I think Courier Landing used to be, a very old boat building yard where those condominiums were built 25, 30 years ago. Next, please. That's just a same image without the zoning on top. So you can see Courier Landing going off to the right. You can see the boatyard to the north, and you can see the relatively dense, historic, traditional neighborhood running like a ribbon along Merrimack Street. Next, please. So when we look at architecture in this neighborhood, I looked at essentially 24 different properties and defined that as my sort of immediate neighborhood context map. There's a wide variety of architectural styles that are in this neighborhood, from way back the colonial styles, which happens to be a revivalist colonial architecture on the new house that was built on Merrimack Court associated with the abutting 6C development. But there's Georgian, Federal, Greek revivals, Italianate, There's contemporary architecture. Obviously, the Courier Landing buildings are more contemporary than some of the other traditional designs because they've been there a lot longer. So there's a wide variety of architecture that's out there. The Cape style structure that we show in that color rendering that you see in other parts of our application is intended to go into that open area at the junction of Union Place and Merrimack Court. Next, please. So land use, there's about inside this, what I'm calling neighborhood context, there's 30 units, about 55% of them or 17 are single families. Then you've got about 20% that are two families and 25% that's really Courier's Landing are in the multifamily category. I think there's 7 units in there. So you've got a mix. It's primarily single family homes that are in this sort of immediate neighborhood. There is some commercial. Obviously, there's the water dependent activities associated with the marina, the boat repair, and the boatyard next door. And there's also, I see a law office in one of the buildings in the boatyard. But primarily, and number 8, the building that's directly across from Sam and Michelle's lot is a outbuilding associated with the marina that you'll see in some of the images. Needs some TLC, but it is a historic structure, but it needs some attention. Next, please. So just looking back at the turn of the last century, this 1883 bird's eye view that you can see the base image of in the larger photograph. What I did was a zoom in of that triangular neighborhood showing Union, Merrimack Street, and Court. And you can see how there was a line of buildings 100 years ago going from the intersection up that southern side of Merrimack Court, which ironically, until you get very close to the intersection now where the beech tree is, there haven't been any structures there for a considerable length of time. So they were removed for whatever reason. And it's only recently that the structure in the middle of those 3 was just recently rebuilt next door. So there is a historical precedent for this neighborhood to have those 2 edges constructed with, principal structures of multiple stories. Next, please. So when we go up onto 344 Merrimack and look at the Levi Carr house, it's built in 1805. It's a 2-family condominium, as I said. Unit 1, which is where Sam and Michelle live, it's under 1,500 square feet of gross living area. So the gross floor area is larger, but that includes, as you know, from Plum Island and elsewhere, gross floor area includes areas that don't include habitable space. So the gross living area is habitable space. These are not large units. And even if you put them together, that's typically what you'd find for the size of a single family house, not only in this neighborhood, but in most new neighborhoods. Okay, next, please. That existing elm tree you can see there, and you can also see this was taken in the summer when that house was being constructed next door as part of that 6C by Joel. So there's probably, I would guess, a 60-foot, it's not particularly thick, but it's a nice vase-shaped elm tree along the property line that we'd like to preserve. I'm just giving you an indication where it is. Next, please. So when you look at the rear yard, again, this summer, you can see that this is taken from the parking area behind 344 Merrimack, looking down at Merrimack Court. So you can see the property is fairly narrow. It tapers. It goes from about 65 feet on Merrimack Street down to about 45 feet right at the frontage on Merrimack Court. And where we're proposing to build, it's between 50 and 55 feet, which is, sort of in the vicinity of that elm tree to the left. Next, please. This is really great what has happened up and down Merrimack Street, but I just thought it was worth pointing out. Most of the property owners on this block of Merrimack Street contributed out of their own pockets to upgrade those sidewalks to brick from concrete. We're clearly trying to carry the spirit of that quality of improvements into the walkways of not only Sam and Michelle's house, which currently has still a concrete couple of sidewalk pads to get to a concrete step, which we're proposing to replace with granite. But the new house down on fronting on Union Place will also have a brick walkway. Next, please. This is that abutting marine storage repair building. I think it was originally, in speaking with one of the abutters, maybe a dairy building and then a workshop, and it's morphed into, maybe it's still a workshop. I don't actually know what goes on in there, but I can see going up and down Union Place for the last year, it needs some attention. So if there's one thing we hope will occur with both Joel building the house next door and selling that house, and hopefully us being able to erect that Cape style structure across from this marine storage building, that it will induce the owner to maybe pay more attention to it, because it is turning into an eyesore for the people that live in this neighborhood. They've sort of turned, I'm sure this is considered back of house to the marina operations, but it's really front of house for everybody living on Merrimack Court and Union Place, and even on Merrimack Street. Next, please. So here's the recently constructed single family. Dave Curie designed this, I believe. I think it's excellent. It really fits in there. That's a classic colonial house design with some subtle differences to indicate it's a new house. Again, it doesn't have a basement, but it has plenty of floor area and it has off-street parking. And it was approved. I don't know that it came to the Zoning Board of Appeals, but obviously it went to the Planning Board for the 6C special permit in order to remove a unit from the two-family next to ours and relocate it to this location in that house and put a preservation restriction on 242 Merrimack Street. Next, please. So just a look at an alternative plan that I think is perfectly reasonable, even though I don't think it's preferable at all for the Kimballs or the surrounding neighborhood. It would be very feasible for them to propose through a special permit for nonconformity, but not a variance application. Big difference, as you all know. They could come in and put an addition on the back of that house in order to increase the floor area, not exponentially, but there's an 870 square foot footprint to that addition in order to support a two-car garage on the ground floor and essentially 420 square feet each unit on the second floor. So not a big addition, but it would be a substantial improvement to a relatively small condominium unit, especially on the corner. There's also room without review and even a special permit for nonconformities to erect a two-car single-story garage that's 22 by 24 feet, as long as it's 6 feet off the property line. I've shown it well in excess of that. So things are likely to happen on this property. That part of going through this exercise was understanding, okay, not necessarily what Brad or Sam or Michelle are going to do, but what's a reasonable, if they were to sell this property, what would somebody do to make those two existing condominium units more marketable, more like everybody else that has the land to provide structured parking within a covered garage, and get in some additional floor area to add to those relatively small condominium units. So this is illustrative. It's not what we're proposing, but it's a reasonable application of the existing code without the need to come in for zoning relief. But it is a very different project. Okay, next, please. So this is just showing it again. The units would go from the 1,000 and the 1,490 to 1,900 and essentially just shy of 1,500 square feet. There'd be 2 covered parking spaces per unit. There'd be very limited offsite improvements, nothing beyond what they'd need, if anything, because they already have utilities into that existing house. So there's no need to do any utility upgrades for them or anybody else. So I don't think there would be any significant offsite improvements to this kind of project. There'd be no requirement for a preservation restriction. There'd be no requirement for doing much of any restoration. I'm sure they'd still take the vinyl windows out because it would be worth it financially. But there would be a lot less work attributed to this kind of project than what we're proposing. There'd be no affordable housing payment. It'd be a lower value product. I think everybody recognizes that. That's why there's limited opportunities to make things better down here for other people than just Sam and Michelle. And I think it would be less consistent with the neighborhood character, even though you can find structures like this in the larger surrounding neighborhood. Next, please. So the proposed site plan, as you probably all know, this hasn't significantly changed in what we've been discussing with at least some of the direct abutters subsequent to filing this application. But we are proposing a substantial renovation, which I'll walk you through real quick, on Sam and Michelle's house. And we're proposing to put that Ferry Road house that looks just like the one up in that image in the upper right, along Union Place. And the two-car garage you see to the right in the rendering would be the box that you see sort of in the middle of the lot. There'd be room for 2 cars in that garage, and there'd be room for 2 cars outside that garage, and there'd still be 8 to 10 feet before you get to the edge of Union Place, which everybody knows is probably one of the narrowest streets in the city. And we have some ideas in what or how to deal with that have been discussed with the abutters, but I'll get to that towards the end of the discussion. Okay, next, please. So what I'm calling unit 1 is the restored, this gets converted to a single family. Sam and Michelle live in this house. It's the historic structure. It ends up being about 2,500 square feet of living area. And next, please. Just highlighting the restoration. There's the existing house now in the photograph. There'd be repairs. That chimney needs significant repairs, maybe even more than we think when we pull off that parged coating on the brick. There are wood windows on Sam and Michelle's units that need to be taken out and restored. It's typically about the same price to replace those windows as it is to restore them, but the idea would be they're going to last a lot longer if they're restored, and it maintains the historic character of this structure if we can reuse the windows that are already there than pitching them out. And if they need a storm window for efficiency purposes, that's fine. A lot of clapboards on this house need to be repaired. The trim and the soffit, especially up along the gutter, there's some serious rot that needs to be replaced, and the house really needs a paint job. And I think Sam and Michelle both feel appropriately like that is not the right color for that house. And it would be nice to come up with something more consistent or more compatible with the colors of the existing homes in the surrounding neighborhood, similar to what we showed on the rendering. Replacement, the left-hand unit, the 1,000 square foot condo, they replaced all those historic period windows with a very cheap vinyl window. It doesn't look good, and it's really the wrong window for that structure. But they have to come out, and then we're going to have to find a replacement wood window to put in those openings to bring this building back. The front door is a Craftsman door. We're going to replace it with a Federal door, more consistent with the original. The lighting will get replaced. The gutters we're proposing as part of this project, they're all aluminum, the downspouts and gutters. We want to take them all off and replace them with a half round copper gutter and copper downspouts. And replace the entry step with granite and remove the concrete walkway from the brick sidewalk and replace it with brick. Next, please. I think the next couple of slides just show you close-ups of those repair elements and the existing conditions on the house. Next, please. Again, you look at the basement window. It is again on Union Place. There's at least 2 or 3 of those that are vinyl. Those would come out. That sort of rickety fence that you see in the upper right with the lattice on the bottom, we're proposing to take that out and replace it with a more compatible fence per the review with the Historic Commission. It is an important screen for the open space behind the unit, but if this is converted to a single, it doesn't need to perform the same function it does today, where that unit has a very small space right now where they need the privacy, because the parking is shared behind it. Next, please. There's that red shed in the middle. It's located on the property line. It's clearly old. The roof is caved in. The photograph in the lower right shows the hole. It's taking lots of water and snow. It needs to be removed. We're proposing as part of this project to remove that accessory structure from the site, again, per the approval of the Historic Commission. Next, please. So Unit 2 is the proposed new single-family home on Union Place. It's about 1,900 square feet. We've already covered that. It's beautiful. Red cedar roof, brick chimney, fireplace, brick walkway, solid wood door, true simulated divided light windows that are double hung, wood clapboards. This house, it really does look spectacular. And there's one on Elmira that Brad did initially that we added the sunroom to on Ferry Road. But I encourage you to look at that structure. It's really well done. It's really, it's unassuming in its volume because again, it's only 20 feet tall. It's a story and a half, but that roof really shines with the red cedar. And you can see in the back, that tree in the middle of the house in the back is the existing elm tree. And it's 20 feet back off the rear foundation, which is ample for the size of that tree. Next, please. So just quickly on the elevations, it's a 36 by 26 foot box. That's a mudroom on the right, the sunroom on the left. Next, please. There's the side view on Merrimack Court with the sunroom, 16 feet in width. There's a shed dormer on the back that's recessed from the edge of the house. And those are the doghouse dormers on the right. Again, the mean height is 20 feet. Next, please. This is the rear of the house with showing the recessed shed dormer in order to get adequate living space in the stairwell into the second floor. The sliding doors going to a patio on the back of the sunroom, and then the door that would lead you into the house, into the mudroom from the garage that would be off to the left of this image. Next, please. The garage is shown here. It's 22 by 22. It's 2 cars, storage above if need be, but that's only a 14-foot garage. And as I said, 2 cars can fit inside and 2 cars can fit in front of it. So 4 cars for that one single family home. And there's ample room for 4 to 5 cars on the parking area behind Sam and Michelle's house. Next, please. So neighborhood input. We spent a lot of time since we filed this application trying to track down as best we could, primarily me, some of the direct abutters and talk through what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, and why we think we've got a good fit for that particular lot in that particular neighborhood. So the focus of my outreach, as best I could get to, was on direct abutters and really identifying their main issues of concern and do our best as a design team to address those issues through really a collaborative discussion with these direct abutters and really develop a number of important but subtle design changes to the project and commitments to and for the abutting properties that really will make this project fit even better than we initially anticipated. So the issues that came out of these discussions, at least to date, were concerns about traffic, off-street parking. Is there enough parking for the people that are going to live in those 2 units? Yeah, there's 2 already up on Merrimack Street, and there's that big surface parking area. But if you build a new home, are they going to be able to park themselves and any visitors on their property instead of on the streets that everybody has to use there that are small, especially Union Place? And the answer is yes. We have at least 4 spaces per unit that's proposed for this. And there were questions about backing out of a driveway of the property that's been there probably the longest across the road at the intersection of Union and Merrimack Court. And we're willing to move that house a few feet towards Merrimack Street. So anybody backing out of that driveway will have ample room to turn that car and go up Union Place to Merrimack Street, which we believe they can do now. But if we can make it better, that's what we're willing to do. There's a lot of concern in this neighborhood about traffic flow and whether the street should be one way. We're not opposed to that. And we've made it clear to them if we all want to work together as a neighborhood to petition the city to look at it and make a decision on whether one or both streets can be made one way instead of both of them 2-way, because it's impossible to pass a car on Union Place. it might make sense to drive one way down Union Court, Merrimack Court, and then one way up to Merrimack Street on Union Place. But as I've said to the abutters, we're all for that concept. We're not traffic engineers. And what's there is there. The city ultimately controls its right of way and its direction of traffic. We're willing to work with the neighbors to, again, petition the city to look at that carefully and make a decision that benefits everybody there, whether we do this project or not, because we're not adding density and we're not adding a parking problem by putting that house on this property down in that open lawn to the rear. Other questions or concerns about contractor parking? Obviously, the house next door is the first one to be built in a long time, and that lot, unlike ours, it only had limited frontage on Merrimack Court, had nothing on Union Place, so it had no opportunity to really handle all the deliveries and the contractors that come together to put a house up. And I'm sure there were some, I've heard of concerns from some of the immediate abutters about that project. And we're proposing, in contrast, again, we're lucky enough to have 240 feet of frontage on Union Place that, yes, is small, but we have ample room to get off that street and park the contractors, park the materials that come in, handle deliveries, and not have cars parking on Merrimack Court or, God forbid, Union Place. It can't support it. So we're proposing to do that construction management plan and have everybody on notice, and Brad's cell phone number would be on there for people to call if there's a problem during construction. Looking at utilities, they're in particular, the house that's at the end of Merrimack Court, that's probably been there the longest, the Gambrell, it appears to be on a septic system. Everybody else in that neighborhood is on a force main that pumps the waste up to Merrimack Street into the main interceptor line on Merrimack Street, and then down to, at some point to the wastewater treatment plant. So we didn't know that house was on septic. And one of the commitments we've made to that owner, since we are going to have to put a septic line ourselves in the street, either Union Place or Merrimack Court, in order to build this single family house and give it a sewer connection, we've committed to putting one in so that house can come off of the septic system that may or may not even pass Title V at this point, but resolve that problem for the owner at 11 Union Place by doing the job while we're doing the job and paying for it ourselves as part of improving this neighborhood. The same can be said with the water line to that house, which the owner believes comes down Union Place and is 100 years old and may in fact be a lead pipe. They don't know, but they're the only one that's connected to Merrimack Street down Union Place. We're going to have to get water into our new house should this move forward, and we're going to do it on Merrimack Court, just like the guy did next door. And we're willing to connect 11 Union Place with a new water connection when we do the trenching of the road to do our own water work. So those are the kinds of commitments that we've made in the past even couple days as things have gone back and forth, and we've got a better appreciation of some of the concerns of the immediate abutters. The folks that are across from the new house that just got built have a lot of rutting and damage to their lawn as a result of contractors perhaps and other people parking off the road. We are proposing to work with the city through the DPS and the condo owners of that end unit on Merrimack Court to put in some granite curbing if it's acceptable to the city, to limit that encroachment from people trying to park off the street right in front of that condominium unit. So those are three examples of things that we can afford to do in this kind of project, because it's a project that generates enough value to really restore the house up on Merrimack Street and make these utility improvements, not just for ourselves, but for the folks that are already down there that have not had, in the case of 11 Union Place, a opportunity for a sewer connection for a long time. So that's what we're referring to with the water line replacement in this slide. So you could add in the sewer. We're also going to take a look at the drainage swale that has a inlet structure that goes under Merrimack Court and see if we can come up with a better filter to pick up the sediment that gets in that culvert and episodically clogs it, so water will build up on the south side of Merrimack Court. And we think we can work out something better with DPS to minimize the need for the city to continuously go down there and suck the sediment out with a vacuum hose, because that's what they do now. So the city takes responsibility for that. We'd like to see if there's a way, as we move through this approval process, that we can come up with a better solution for the city and for the two owners that'll straddle that swale. So we think we have adequate snow storage. We're not, neighbors are definitely coming into this concerned about adding density, adding units, adding stuff that seems really big to them on these small streets. The streets are small, but we're committed to making those streets better by working with the city and the neighborhood to look at the traffic flows, not have any on-street parking associated with this development, and have adequate snow storage on the properties so they're not pushing it out onto the street. And we're also going to come up with a landscape plan with input from the abutters should this move forward, and the city, to address any sightline issues that may or may not be there if they change the traffic flow. So a lot of offsite improvements have come out of those conversations with, again, the immediate abutters. Next, please. So we've got the affordable housing payment, we've got the water and not basement waterproofing, we've got a sewer line extension. I think that's moved into a higher position than any waterproofing to the abutters. At the end of Union Place, we've got that curbing treatment that's along the end of Courier Landing. And, we're supportive of what the neighborhood wants to do, and hopefully with us leading the charge, we can give it a fair shake as to whether a one-way traffic flow here is possible. Next, please. So I had a whole list of about 10 stipulations or 11 there that I had circulated with some of the direct abutters, any of them that I had contact information from. And I have expanded that significantly. And I'd like, should time afford it when we're done, to simply enumerate those stipulations that we've committed to, both in the application, but also with our continued collaborations with the direct abutters. But they essentially are bulleted there on the left. We are going to not have any additional units being added to this property in the future. So we're proposing a use restriction that those single families remain single family, that there be the preservation restriction that's required under the 6C, that we have a construction with that all the drawings are adequately detailed and annotated before this gets out of the planning board. So all those material choices find their way into the building as it's constructed. Having a construction management plan, having a detailed landscape plan, off-street improvement plan to deal with sewer, water, and curbing, have the restoration plan flushed out with great detail at the Historic Commission. Should we go there? Should this continue? Making sure Scott's drawings, again, show all the details that are associated with those renderings that are in this application. Make the affordable housing payment, again, that one's as required. And acknowledge that, this project doesn't go forward even tonight if this is approved without the planning board also approving a discretionary permit, the special permit for the 6C. Next, please. So the whole hardship criteria, it's a little thin on that screen because I was still working on it when I sent this in. But in terms of the criteria of the ordinance and the unique conditions of this lot, clearly the lot shape is very different than most of the lots in this district. It's narrow, and again, it tapers from 65 down to 45 as you go to Merrimack Court. It's got frontage, lots of it, on 3 streets. Very unusual to have that. And, for historical precedent purposes, it did have another single family home at that intersection at some point in the last 100 years. So there are unique conditions that we think are particular to this lot that present at least an argument for meeting a hardship criteria under the lot shape. We think it's also a reasonable request, given the high restoration costs associated with fixing the building that's already there. And we also think it's reasonable for 344 Merrimack, again, the Levy Car House, that if you're going to make that investment, it doesn't make sense, given that house is not designed as a two-family originally. It's been bastardized to make it a two-family. It creates challenges for the preservation restriction to maintain all of those improvements over time because it is a condominium project. It can be done, but it's going to require a lot of management for two people to continue to reside in that home and maintain both sides of it appropriately as time goes on. So in addition, I think it's important to acknowledge that the same use and layout and even approval process, with the exception of maybe the variances that have been added to this because of the ordinance change, the property next door did exactly the same thing in erecting that new single family home and converting the two-family next door at 242 into a single family structure with a preservation restriction. So, and again, we're not looking to change the density or the use. We're not looking to add, there's no new nonconformities associated with this project. There are already existing nonconformities that are being adjusted. The only new, it's not a new nonconformity. The new nonconformity is that it won't conform to 6C, requiring you have to have 15,000 square feet. It's already a two-family use with less than 15,000 square feet. So it's only because we need the 6C, the two single families from the planning board on one lot, that we are actually needing a variance to create what you could call a new nonconformity, even though it already exists. The hardship is not self-imposed. Sam and Michelle didn't create this lot shape. Recent ordinance changes have made things more challenging in respect to the lot area requirements and the affordable housing payment, but Sam and Michelle are honoring that requirement because they have to, and they will. And it's not a special privilege to grant this to Sam and Michelle, because again, it's very similar to what the abutting property owner received last year from the city in respect to a 6C approval. And knowing this is still subject to Historic Commission and Planning Board approval, there's an extensive public process that we are just starting tonight for this project to come to fruition, should it move forward. And lastly, I think it's consistent, clearly to me, it's consistent with the surrounding neighborhood character to design this project in such a manner. So looking at the findings, the use is permitted under the ordinance. It's essential or desirable. It's allowed in the WMD to have a two-family. It's already there. It's not going to create an undue traffic impact. There's already 2 units there. There'll be the amount of cars that go with 2 units. We're providing adequate off-street parking. It's not going to overburden public utilities. There's already 2 sewer lines, 2 water lines that are going to those condominiums, so there's no change. The conditions of the special permit, I think, have been met, and we've met and exceeded the standards for the 6C. Should we get there and make that presentation, it's certainly not going to impair the integrity or the character of the surrounding neighborhood. I would argue it's going to significantly enhance it, enhance the value, enhance the experience of going into that neighborhood. It's not going to cause an excess of a use. This is a single family neighborhood for all intents and purposes. So it's consistent with that. It's within harmony of the ordinance itself. It's considerably less than the 25 feet of height that's allowed. It meets all other dimensional controls except for the rear yard setback. And that's because this lot has 3 front yards that's actually a rear. That the 20 feet that we're showing on the back is supposed to be 25. But remember, this lot currently today does not have a side yard. It has 3 fronts and 1 rear because it fronts on 3 streets. That's incredibly unique. And it doesn't create any adverse environmental impacts. We're not putting a basement under this structure. It's not going to be sitting in water, and we're going to make drainage improvements to that swale behind this proposed house next to the one that was just constructed. And we're going to make environmental improvements by providing a sewer connection to probably a failed Title V system for a house that's at the end of this street, on the marsh going into the Merrimack River. So I would argue this has positive environmental impacts. And if in fact there's a 100-year-old lead pipe, which I'm not suggesting there is, but it's been suggested to me there might be, that's supplying water to that house at the end of the street. We're clearly going to improve that environmental impact by putting a new pipe off of Merrimack Court in what was just extended for the house next door to that abutter at the end of Union Place. Next, please. Almost done, guys. So just sort of a recap of the public benefits. This is a historic preservation or restoration project. That house on Merrimack Street is going to pop and shine if this can go forward, and they're required to make Sam and Michelle the number and the quality of the improvements that are proposed in this application. The preservation restriction will keep it that way in perpetuity. This is a high quality building. You can all see it on Ferry Road and High Street. It's no one would not want to have something like that in their neighborhood. And we've got, I would argue, very sizable off-site neighborhood improvements that I just walked you through, none of which were included in the project next door. So we as a team and as a process have gone above and beyond what's typically done. And most of you know that's what I try to bring to you, because I know we need relief and I know that we need support. We go above and beyond, and this is not just about making things better for Sam and Michelle. It's about making things better for everybody. Again, Bill Harris, baking a bigger pie and sharing the proceeds. And we'll make that affordable housing payment that the city can use wherever it so chooses. Next, please. All right, I just had one thing to say before I finally be quiet, and I'm greatly appreciative that you've given me this much time, and I apologize it's taken me this long. But just before we open it up for public comment and your questions, I'd just like to end by summarizing, what I think this application or project represents. There's no new nonconformities, with the exception of the oddity of the 6C requiring now the 15,000 square feet. There's no new housing units. It's consistent with the quality and character of the surrounding properties. There's a preservation restriction that comes to protect that investment up on Merrimack Street in perpetuity. There's a high quality building and site design. It also includes very important offsite improvements to the street and to the immediate abutters. And it includes an affordable housing payment, and it adds significantly to the surrounding property values, which furthers what I see as an outsider as an ongoing revitalization of this really cool neighborhood. So I think for those reasons, I'd like to ask for your support of the project. And should we get to the point where there's a level of interest to move forward with this project, I would be happy to share at that time the stipulations that we have offered all the direct abutters to, again, give them assurance we're putting our money where our mouth is, and we're going to do what we say we're going to do. So thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, for your patience. And hopefully you're still awake and that was helpful.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cracknell. And with that, we'll close that portion of the public hearing and go to the public comment section. And of course, you'll take note that there is a slide up right now for instructions on public comment. I suspect everyone's familiar with that. And with that, I will begin to recognize hands. If you wish to speak, just simply raise your hand at the bottom of your screen and we'll recognize you. Just to remind you, give your name and address for the record. Recognizing the first hand, it simply says Dan. Dan, if that's you, I invite you to unmute your mic and you have the floor.
Okay, I just unmuted the mic. I hope you can hear me.
We can, Dan. Thank you.
I am the direct abutter at 342 Merrimack Street. And I actually have no huge...
Dan, I'm sorry. Could we just get your full name for our keeper?
Oh, I'm sorry. First name, Daniel Lynch, L-Y-N-C-H, 342 Merrimack Street.
Thank you, sir.
All right. I've mentioned to Sam, not Michelle, but mostly to Sam. I've never met Mr. Cracknell, but I mentioned to Sam that my only concern is we have, I guess you're going to call it like a peekaboo view of the Merrimack River, looking down across near the elm tree, looking out towards the boat basin, out to the river. And I said, that's my big concern, is that we always maintain that view. Sam assured me that that would not be compromised. I've never talked to Mr. Cracknell, but basically what I'm looking at, where the house is going to be placed, it's going to be sticking right in my view. I mean, I just have no doubt that it's going to be. So I would actually like, before I even say, yep, I support this project 100%, I'd like to see the foundation marked out where they intend to put the project. And then I can make the determinations by looking and saying, oh, okay, it's going to block it or it's not going to block it. Other than that, I didn't like the fact that Mr. Cracknell mentioned several times that he talked to all the abutters. And I guess being the closest abutter, this has nothing to do with it, just not there. But there is a groundwater issue out back there. And that was brought up when another developer tried to apply for a building permit back there. And he's not going to be able to get a basement. He mentioned that he's not going to get a basement in, but he is going to have to deal with the groundwater. And it's not doing the neighborhood any harm or indifference. It's just something he's going to have to deal with if he does put a house back there. However, that's my only concern is where it's located. I mentioned that to Sam, and that's where I stand right now. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you, sir. I will recognize, again, just reading the moniker on your screen name, Steve. Steve, if that is you, if you could kindly just give your name and address, and you have the floor.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
We sure can, yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. This is Steve and Karen Sheppy. We've lived in the Merrimack Court neighborhood for 33 years, about 13 of those at 8 Merrimack Court, and the last 20 at 3 Courier's Landing, which is our current home. And I'd just like to note that our position on this to some degree relates to the newly constructed home at 7 Merrimack Court, which is on a very small lot in which the proposed house abuts. That's not shown on some of the plans, but I think that clearly impacts our view here. And taking into account the nonconformities of the proposal, as well as the effect of the 7 Merrimack Court structure, with this very small lot, the project entails more density than we can support. I'd also say that we would not support one-way traffic flow if it involved changing directions or restricting flow on Merrimack Court. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Steve. And anyone else wish to be heard? I recognize Joe Lilly. Mr. Lilly, if you would unmute your mic and just give your name and address, you have the floor, sir. Mr. Lilly, if you, it looks like your microphone is still muted. If you want to just click the bottom left of your screen, a microphone icon, and unmute your mic, we'll recognize your comments now. Okay, there we go. We can hear you now, sir.
Thank you. Joe Lilly, 1 Courier's Landing. And I appreciate being able to speak. I'd just like to support what Steve said. On many of the renderings that we've seen this evening, the newest house is not shown, and I believe the distance between this proposed home on Union, new home, and the new house would be very tight. Also, Merrimack Court runs into the marina. It's an open, free road. It was originally told to us by the owners that would be closed and only for fire, and there was a rope across that. That over the years has disappeared, as has the agreement. So there's a lot of boat traffic, trailers, boats coming in and out of the marina on Merrimack Court. So essentially where that house would be built is right near what's actually a 3-way intersection of the marina, Union Street, and Merrimack Court. That seems like an awful tight fit, and we did have a lot of issues around construction. With the recent house, they did say they would try, but it didn't work out very well. And a lot of us had a lot of impact, and some days couldn't get out of our homes. But my greater concern is I'm all in on the house on Merrimack Street being improved and brought to historic standards. But this second house, I think we ought to think long and hard before we'd allow a house down there. And there are significant water issues in that property. There's a whale, I've walked the dogs over that years past. I've been down here a long time as well, not as long as Steve and Karen, but I've been here 15, 20 years. And we see a lot of water coming in through there. I don't know how that's going to work, but it feels tight to me in terms of one more house going on Union Street. Union Street is a tiny street. So I have to say at this moment, I'm not in favor, and unless there's something here I'm missing. So thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Lilly. Recognizing Cynthia Lee Blatt. Ms. Blatt, you want to unmute your mic. You have the floor.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Lee Black. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I've owned this house for roughly 30 years. My name is Cynthia Blatt, and I own the property at 11 Union Place. I agree with the people that have spoken. I'm 71 years old, and that area has been part of my life. My grandfather owned Riverside Dairy, which is the building that is in disarray right now. And so I know that it's a very narrow street. I am for making it a one-way street, and I understand Mr. Libby's concern for the marina. I agree on that part, but my concern is the traffic and the density of the neighborhood. But if Mr. Cracknell is true to his word in what he's been saying about what they intend to do, I am in support of his construction.
Very good. Was there anything further, Ms. Blatt?
I wish that the people on the board would go and see the area in question. I know that a lot of people don't even know where Union Place is because they confuse it with Union Street. So I think that they need to go and see the area in question and see about the traffic and have a better concept or view of what is, paper doesn't really show it all. I guess that's all I have to say.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Blatt. Recognizing Mr. Kutcher. Mr. Kutcher, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. First of all, I want to thank everybody for attending tonight and for listening to Mr. Cracknell. Dan, Steve, and Joe, in particular, and everyone in the neighborhood, I am more than willing to meet with anybody on a case-by-case, or whether we do it on a Saturday afternoon or Saturday walkthrough, but just show what we're proposing, both logistically, where the house would situate, and the actual height of the home. I don't believe, and we took great pains to make sure that we would not impact anyone's views. And unless we missed something, I don't think will adversely affect anyone's views. And I do understand and respect the question about water, which is why I built in areas that are certainly much tougher than this. And if you build with the right drainage and you don't go into the water table, so you're not raising the water table, you're not, quote, spilling water over, you'll not adversely affect it. As a matter of fact, you can do a lot to correct some of the water issues there. I walked that with the Kimballs and with Nick, and I'm confident with just that little murky area in the back, that swale can be corrected, cleaned out, and made to operate the way it should. So that any additional water will not be a concern, but better than that, operate and function better has for the last 10 years, based on my understanding of a few people in the neighborhood that I have spoken with. I also want to say that we've done five other 60s in the city over the last 12 years, and we hold ourselves accountable to everything is written in that condition of approval. But more than that, we've gone above and beyond. We will meet with the people. If we can work with them in some small way, we do. We go out of our way to accommodate them. I understand this is their neighborhood. And when you bring in new construction in there for a period of 5 or 6 months, it can be somewhat, and I'm fully cognizant of that. And I will do everything I can, from keeping parking on site to working with neighbors. Everyone will have my cell phone number. If there's an issue or if anything goes wrong, I want it. We will correct it. You can't continue to build in a city unless you have a good name, unless you follow through on what you say you're going to do. We have in the past, we will continue to. And if we're given the opportunity, I promise you that I will meet with not just the direct abutters and neighbors, but everyone in the neighborhood who wants to meet with me, whether we meet at my office to start out with, then walk the neighborhood, or we meet right in the neighborhood. But I'd like the opportunity to work and meet with all the neighbors there. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Kutcher. Let's see, looking, I see Ms. Blatt, I see your hand is still raised. Did you wish to be recognized again, or is that just your hand just still raised?
No, I'm sorry.
No, quite all right. I just want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak, and so I'm making the rounds. But I will recognize Sam Kimball. Mr. Kimball, if you want to unmute your mic, you have the floor. And again, just a comment for all those that wish to speak in the public comment. If you could, just as a courtesy, if you are through with your remarks, just kindly lower your hand, or I should say unraise your hand, so that we can move past you. And with that, Mr. Kimball. Mr. Kimball, it seems as though your microphone is still muted. The bottom left of your screen, you'll find a microphone icon, an old-timey looking microphone icon. Just click that, and that should open up your mic, sir. While Mr. Kimball works on that, we'll continue around. I'll circle back to you, Mr. Kimball. So we'll make sure we'll give you a second pass at this for sure. Mr. Daniel Denner, I'll recognize you, and if you could again just unmute your mic, give your name and address. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dan Daner, and I'm here with my wife Stephanie. We live at 346 Merrimack Street, directly across Union Place from the Kimballs. I did want to mention first that that idea that was put forward by an earlier speaker about the entrance, that sort of back entrance to the boat basin, where he was saying it was like an intersection, and having that closed off, or petitioning the boat basin to close that off, mainly because they have 2 entrances on Merrimack Street already. And that is a good idea. But my wife and I would like to say that we are in support of Sam's plan for the neighborhood for a couple reasons. One is their commitment to keeping the flavor and the historical accuracy and those types of things. I believe they'll be true to that plan. The other is to comment on the traffic that was brought up from time to time. Our driveway is on Union Place, and there is virtually no traffic there. In fact, I have 2 teenage boys that play with Sam and Michelle's children often on that street, because in fact, a basketball court, a basketball hoop is erected there for playing, due to how, there's not a lot of traffic. So that we're also interested in the project because it will spread out the car parking. So Sam's yard with the tenant, the cars are gathered together in one driveway, whereas taking the second, resident into a house that farther down Union Place, I believe would alleviate, that situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Daner. And Miss Betsy Fitzgerald. Miss Fitzgerald, you have the floor if you want to just unmute your mic, and we'll go ahead and recognize your remarks.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yes, Betsy Fitzgerald, 10 Merrimack Court. I'm directly across from the new house that was just erected, and I will look at the side of this house being proposed, basically. I will mention that we are part-time residents there. This is not a full-time home for us, but oftentimes we are there months at a time. And we haven't been there all that long, but I definitely feel very strongly about the fact that over the years that we've been there, I can count on some car, and I don't know whose it is, usually parked on the street, because it's my feeling that many cars don't have adequate parking spaces on their own property. So they choose to drive down to the front of our house or across the street, and they're parked there pretty regularly over days. So it's uncomfortable to have vehicles there. My point about concern is, and I understand probably there isn't a lot of traffic that comes up or down Union, but it is a huge cut through. Merrimack Court is a huge cut through. It is a lot of traffic coming through, either to go to the boatyard or just come down to park because there's an open space there. And I just really feel strongly that over, if you look at the whole neighborhood, it's quite dense already. And I know that's kind of like a historic value to a lot of neighborhoods, that there was a lot of density. But I think I prefer more openness and space and less congestion. And I think this additional project will contribute to that. So I have respect the fact that they want to do some restoration, and it really does look quite impressive. But I have to say that I think it's going to contribute to a lot of density that's already there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fitzgerald. Recognizing Michelle Kimball. Ms. Kimball, you have the floor.
Put mine down.
Hi, actually, this is Sam Kimball. I couldn't get my microphone working on my phone. Apologies for that. So anyways, first of all, I just want to thank all our neighbors for speaking up and letting us know their opinions. And I'll just go on to kind of further what Nick had said about, that we as a team, Michelle and I together, and with Nick and Brad, made considerable efforts reaching out to the neighbors. And I apologize to anyone who wasn't able to speak with Nick. I know that perhaps he did reach out to a lot of people whose phone numbers and emails I had, and for one reason or another, whether it went into someone's spam folder, who knows, but I will say that he did make earnest efforts to reach out to everyone in the neighborhood. And I was very encouraged by and impressed by what Nick shared, that he had conversations going with Betsy Fitzgerald and Cindy Blatt, who are direct abutters, as far as their concerns with traffic and all the other issues with water, et cetera. I have great faith, given my relationship thus far with Nick and Brad, that they will make every effort to take into consideration everyone's concerns, whether it's about a view or traffic. Again, the thing about the one-way streets, it seems like it's very feasible. Whether or not the city will go for that, we don't know. But just want to say that, our most concern is that we want to keep harmony in the neighborhood. We don't want to step on anyone's toes. We want to do the right thing. We want to do the project that we are hopefully going to do in the right way for everyone concerned. And of course, being able to do the historic reservation and restoration on our property would be wonderful, both for the neighborhood and obviously for us. So that's about it. I just wanted to reiterate what Nick had said and cover any bases there, and put my appeal to the board that they hopefully approve this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimball. Any other hands? I see no further hands. Before I close out this portion of the public hearing, I just want to give sort of last call.
Hey, Rob.
Public comments. Yes.
Am I able to respond?
Oh, Nick, of course, yes.
Sorry, I couldn't find my hand.
No
But
worries.
yeah, I just want to say a few words as a response to some of the comments raised in the last 15 minutes.
I'll tell you what, if I could, I want to give you that opportunity, but I'd like to close out the public comment section, and then there'll be questions from the board, you can be sure. And that would be an opportunity for you to address it.
All right.
If I can ask you to just sort of take a pause, and we'll get right to that.
That's great.
That's
of
fair?
course.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so any further comments from any members of the attending audience? Raise your hand. Going once, going twice. I will go ahead, seeing no further hands, I'll go ahead and close that portion of the public hearing. And we will now go to questions from the board. And we will begin with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cracknell was, as always, very thorough, thoughtful, impressive presentation. And I have one easy question, one more difficult. First of all, apropos of nothing, but it's a quick answer, I think. On the artist rendering, there are two different depictions of the bump out on the proposed smaller new home. One has what looks like a roof deck, one has a roof. Has that changed to be a roof?
No, that's an excellent observation. Before I got the rendering of the proposed, what we're proposing is the roof deck. So you can come out of the second floor, probably a master bedroom, and go onto that sunroom and be able to get seasonal views of the water as well. So that's the intention, is to have a walkout. If people don't like that, the reason the other image doesn't show it is probably because when I originally was putting this together, I grabbed the image of the house on Ferry Road that did not have the deck, or it was an earlier version. But I believe what Brad, put your hand up if I'm wrong, the idea here is to have some outdoor space on top of the sunroom to come out of the second floor onto a very 150 square foot deck area where you could put a table and 2 chairs. So good pickup, but that's what I believe the intention is. And you can see on the slide that's currently on the screen that shows as a roof. So that's a miscommunication between us and John Hargraves, who initially followed my sketch, which put a roof on it at the beginning. So I apologize for that.
No worries there. It's kind of minor to what we're here for.
I get it.
First, I just want to let Ms. Blatt know she had some concerns over whether we had done site, done a tour of the property. I can speak for myself that I have done a complete tour of the property. I think I can't speak for the board, but I know the board does make an effort whenever possible to get and see it. So I have seen the property that's there, the lot, the narrowness of the area. And I just want to allay those fears that maybe some of us haven't done that. And Mr. Cracknell, I just wonder, with the long presentation, first and foremost, we're here because you're looking for a variance. And I wonder if you could remind the board on what relief you're seeking from us tonight.
Yeah, sorry about that. I think it was only really spelled out in the legal ad. I apologize for that. We're seeking, and correct me, Kate, if I'm wrong, or Rob, I haven't got the legal notice in front of me, but we're looking for a dimensional variance for the requirement of having 15,000 square feet for a 2-family use. That's a pre-existing non-conforming lot area. And again, the confusion there is it exists, but the 6C now requires that you meet that 15 in order to apply for the 6C special permit. So that's number one, a dimensional variance to the minimum lot area requirements for a 2-family use. I believe we're also seeking a reduction of 5 feet in the rear yard setback. We're showing 20 behind the proposed new single-family structure, where 25, I think, is required. So that's the second one. I think all the others are alterations to pre-existing non-conforming setbacks that are already present on the property. So Kate, have I got that more or less correct? I can pull out the analysis form, but I think that's.
Hi, it's Caitlin Sullivan from the planning office. You're also seeking the variance for the front yard setback.
Yeah, and yes. And that came from the planning department, not me, for the primary reason that, so that I guess is being added. I don't know that the legal ad, I don't know what the legal ad said. It was informed to me from, I think, Kate, that we need relief to the front yard setback. I didn't really see the reason for that when I filed, because the existing structure's front yard is Union Place and it has less than 1 foot as a front yard setback. And I guess the interpretation, and it doesn't matter in the bigger scheme of things, the interpretation that with the planning department took was there aren't two structures already on Union Place on this side, therefore you can't use the established front yard setback to place the second home in alignment with the one that's already there. So I'm not going to argue that point. We obviously want to maintain consistency within reason of setback along Union Place, and clearly 0.9 inches is not adequate for the front yard of this house. So we have pushed it back at least 6 feet from the edge of pavement and 5 feet where the front door is from the property line in order to maintain that 20-foot rear yard, which consequently, I think there's either 15 or 20 feet, unless they got a variance, and you guys would, some of you or all of you would remember for Dan's property next door where he asked for the same permit, the speaker that is talking about the sight lines, when he permitted adding a second house and changing his house to a single family, there was a requirement in this district to have a 20-foot side yard. So if in fact the house never came to the zoning board and has a 20-foot side yard setback, well, we have another 20 feet in our rear yard. So they're 40 feet apart, which is fully compliant with what you'd expect to see with two houses that are fully compliant with 20-foot required side yards, which gets you a 40-foot gap between the two buildings. So I think someone else raised the issue from Courier Landing about whether there was too much compaction. The new house is going to sit on top of the house that was just built. They're going to be 40 feet or more apart, 40 feet at least apart, which is not inconsequential. Obviously, it'll look different than it does today, just as it looks different today from what it looked like last year before they put that new house there. But I wanted, and the last piece, just on that point of setbacks, another speaker raised the issue of, gee, it looks like, boat traffic or things coming out of Merrimack Court are somehow going to have a problem with where they're proposing to put this new single family structure. Most houses on Merrimack Court are within 10 to 12 feet of the property line, all the way up, including the houses at Courier Landing, Betsy's house. So they're very close to the street. We're going to be, I just looked at the map, we're going to be 4 times, we're going to be at least 40 feet. That sunroom will be at least 40 to 45 feet from the edge of pavement on Merrimack Court, which is nearly 4 times more than the people already have between their front door and the edge of pavement on Merrimack Court. So that there's going to be no, and we're also proposing to maybe slide this house, and not because we feel it needs to move further away from Merrimack Court. We're trying to work with Cindy across the road to make sure when she backs out of her driveway, she doesn't feel like that house is right on her. So we're proposing to slide that house as much as 5 feet towards Merrimack Street as one of the stipulations, which also as a consequence, unintended, will improve any encumbrance on Dan's view, which isn't currently protected by any kind of easement or encumbrance on this property. Dan's view, certainly from his second floor, would not be encumbered with this house being placed here, and sliding it 5 feet closer to Merrimack Street will only help preserve the view over and to the left of that elm tree. But we can only do the best we can. If there was a view easement already there for Dan, then the house would be outside of that view easement. We're trying to essentially give him as much of a view easement as we can reasonably by restricting any upward expansion or additions to any of these structures, which is the equivalent of a view easement to him, because these people are not going to be able to come in and get a building permit to add anything else that might encroach his view of the water. Anyway, sorry, that's long-winded.
That's okay. So to get back to the front
Mark,
yard setback,
yeah.
did you say that front yard setback is going to be, trying to look at the, is it
We're not
around
opposed
4
to-
feet?
it's 4 feet at that corner.
Right.
But the front door is closer to 5.5 feet in the middle of that structure. And so we're going to slide it. We're proposing, and this is the only design change we're proposing to make as a stipulation. So it's not like I have a long list of things that's going to twist everybody's mind up here. But we're proposing to slide that house 5 feet towards Merrimack Street, the new house, in order to extend that 4-foot setback probably to 5.5 at the corner, getting you 6.5 at the middle of the house where the door is. So, it's further away from the edge of pavement for anybody driving on Union Place. And particularly to help Cindy back out of her driveway and not worry about the house being there because Union Place is so narrow.
Right. Right. That's all I have for now. Thank you. And I do appreciate the willingness that everyone has shown to work with neighbors. And I do believe that from past projects that you do your best to listen to the neighborhood and the abutters. So I do appreciate that. So that's all I have for now.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle, questions from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cracknell, thanks for the very thorough presentation. I think it'd be best sort of to cut to the quick here. And you made reference to the fact during your presentation, you made reference to the fact that the 6C ordinance has changed over the year, and it's different. It's more restrictive. It requires you to apply for these variances. Can you sort of take your best shot at this question, which is, why would entertaining the variance request not be considered to nullify or substantially derogate from the intent or the purpose of the changes to the 6C ordinance that were just put in place by the city council?
No, that's a great question. So just to clarify what I understand, and certainly Kate can jump in or anybody that's better versed at this than me, my understanding of the only two salient changes that at least affect this project, there may be some other subtle changes that were made that don't, as far as I can tell, is there's the requirement now that you have the minimum lot area for a 2-family use in whatever district you're situated in. So obviously we know that's different in each district, the R3, the R2, and the WMD. I'm sure that, so if I'll answer maybe why they did that and why this project, I don't think conflicts with that, the intentions of why that was done in just a sec. The only other change that is affected, which we don't take issue with, is the requirement now for a pretty substantial affordable housing payment to do one of those projects, which we're not asking for relief from. So I know you know that, but I'm just putting that out there. Those are the only two substantive changes I'm aware of that affect this project. And we have no issues other than needing to write a check for $40,000 should this go ahead to the Affordable Housing Trust. And both Sam, Brad, and Michelle have already come to terms with the fact they're going to need to do that. And we haven't asked for relief. So one has to ask oneself, okay, well, I didn't sit through those proceedings, so I'm somewhat guessing in order to answer why I think this is not inconsistent with that fairly recent municipal intent of having the city council require 15,000 square feet in this particular district. It can be 10,000 in another or 12,000, depending on where you are. Why this would fly in the face of that requirement is, I think, the special or unique features of this particular lot render it moot. I mean, there's no substantive reason why. First of all, we're not creating a 2-family use. So people can do 6Cs, and I've done a couple where I've had to create the use before I go and ask for the 6C. So we're not doing that here. But the 6C operates as both a 1-step and a 2-step. Most of the time, developers and builders have been using existing 2 families to do a 6C, but there have been some instances, and it will increase, where they seek a special permit from you folks to do a 2-family and then do the 6C. We did that over on Walnut Street with Brad and the Zoning Board of Appeals. We came and got a special permit to do a 2-family use on Walnut Street and Oakland. And then we went and got a 6C with all of these terms and conditions similar to what I'm presenting tonight for this project, all these assurances to the neighbors, to the applicant, and then walked over and applied for a 6C special permit. So, you know, this can be applied in any number of ways. And we already have a 2-family use. It's protected, it's established. Can they change that? Obviously, with this property, with all its quirkiness, it's doubtful they can do anything substantive without at least a special permit for nonconformities, but they can do a lot without any dimensional variances, none of which is optimal for the restoration of the structure or dealing with any of these neighborhood issues. So I think this particular property in its configuration, having all that frontage, being on 3 streets, if this house gets built as we're proposing, I swear to you, you will go to that property, just like going to Ferry Road or Elmira or any of the other ones, the Carter Street property I did with Al Clifford on Monroe Street. You'll go to any of these properties and you will not see that this is a condominium. It is going to look like 2 single-family homes on separate lots. It's going to fit the context of that neighborhood, which is really what 6C has strove to do over the last 20 years, that it's been amended several times to get away from, you know, these 2 houses attached with a weak connector. What was proposed here in 2013 was garbage. And luckily it didn't go anywhere. But there are lots of examples in Newburyport of developers sticking 2 houses together with a lousy connector because they could do that. And the ordinance changed as a response of the failure of that happening. And I think the intent was likely here to somehow stem, this wasn't a qualitative amendment to say you've got to have 15,000 square feet. It was a quantitative amendment. Somehow somebody thought, hey, if we make you have the minimum lot area, there'll be less of these things all over the city. And because they aren't all great, they certainly aren't all like my projects, that's for sure. And when they're not great, you usually find local governments changing the code at some point because they think that's the solution. Just get rid of them all and make it very difficult to do any of them. I think this is an appropriate property with appropriate characteristics that are unique to this district and that neighborhood, that it's a far better solution than mucking around with what's already a 2-family use on a structure that's already been really mucked about. You know, it's got a lot of problems that need to get resolved, and this project can do it. And we have precedent for a house in this, 3 houses along here, and there is a house next door that was just built. So that thing is sort of orphaned right now. This will certainly not derogate from the character of Merrimack Court. And it's not even, if we move it 5 feet away, it's almost 50 feet from the edge of pavement. I mean, you can almost park a fire truck between the house and the street. So we're doing the best we can, but I think in an answer to your question, this is not inconsistent with good planning and design. And as we all know, you guys are there for a reason on the zoning board, and it's because one size doesn't fit all. And it doesn't mean everything that comes to you gets approved or should get approved. But I think this is a pretty easy case for me to look at from a design and a planning perspective, that it's far better for this neighborhood and that property and that structure to do it this way than some other way of adding things on to what's already there.
Thank you, Mr. Cracknell. You did answer my question, and actually you answered a question I hadn't even asked, which was about the unique circumstances regarding the lot. So I thank you for that too. And that's it for questions for me for right now.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, I'd just like to pick up for a sec on the question that was just asked about the city council has just said you can do this, but you need to have 15,000 square feet. And the question was asked, if we grant a variance around that, aren't we just nullifying what they just did? So I'd like to add a little bit to that question, which is, I could understand that if the city council said, well, it's got to be 15,000 square feet unless it's already a two-family residence like this one. But they didn't say that. They said 15,000 square feet. So I'm really not looking to repeat the long answer, but I still don't quite get it, how what you're asking us to do isn't just to simply nullify what the city council just voted. They did not put in there, unless already has a two-family on it. So
Yeah,
I don't get it.
okay, thanks, Ken. So first of all, they didn't say, make sure you have 15,000 square feet. That's not what the ordinance says. And you probably know that, but I just want everybody listening to know what the ordinance says and what was amended. What was amended is far more general than that kind of surgical amendment that would say, hey, in the WMD, you got to have 15,000 square feet and we're going to spell it out that way. What they said is anywhere in the city of Newburyport where you either have a two-family use that's there or you have one that's allowed, you have to meet the minimum lot area requirements for a two-family use, which just so happens in the WMD to be 15,000. That number is going to change depending on where you are. I think you know that, but I think it has to be clear to everybody. This was not such a surgical amendment that said thou shalt have 15,000 square feet. Clearly, there was an intention from the city council to ward off something with that kind of quantitative requirement of saying, and I don't even know sitting here that they did or did not differentiate or even discuss the difference between an existing two-family and one like Walnut Street, which was created in a two-step process. I can't tell you I wasn't there. All I can tell you is
we do know they did. We do know they did not put the language in what they voted.
They didn't put what? Sorry, what language?
The language that if it already is a two-family, then you don't need to go through the zoning board of appeals.
Well, yeah, we know they didn't do that, but you and I both don't know that they even discussed that or even thought about that. It wasn't changed. It was already, they changed the existing ordinance. So all I would say to you is, you guys are here, as you know, to look at things case by case. And if it meets the standard, I mean, everybody that's in front of you, whether they're altering a pre-existing non-conforming situation or they're creating a new one, you're asking yourself, you're dealing with people that can't fit the letter of the law. Whether the ordinance was passed last week or 10 years ago, it really shouldn't matter. If it was 10 years ago and it was a bad ordinance, it should have been fixed a long time ago. I'm not suggesting the ordinance is flawed, but I'm suggesting this particular property and project, given it's almost the size, I mean, we're not dealing with a 5,000 square foot lot here. We're dealing with something that's the size of a two-car garage that's not there. So I would encourage you all to ask yourselves, does this make sense? Knowing it's on the 5-yard line, it's not a touchdown, but it's in the red zone. So we should consider it.
I'd like to ask some more questions, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of the discussion that came up during the long presentation and a lot of the abutter comments was about things like traffic and utilities and all kinds of things that when you get to the planning board, you'll be talking about. This is a very comprehensive plan. It has a lot of elements to it, a lot of things that the planning board has to wrestle with. Why did you not go to them first and get that process going? Why did you come to us first?
Because I'm really not allowed to. It wouldn't make sense to go to the planning board first when you folks have a solid 2 hands on the wheel. If this project does not merit, first of all of those things you just mentioned, it is comprehensive, but let's be also fair about the fact that it's It's an existing use. The plans that have been submitted are what they are. The parking is off street. If somebody debates that, looking at the plans or listening to the presentation, I definitely want to hear that, because I don't see where any of the externalities that may or may not have been caused by the property next door are going to be able to repeat themselves here. And I think the plans and the presentation make that painfully clear. If that's not the case, we should talk some more about those traffic and utility issues. But Sam and Brad and Michelle don't have an infinite amount of money to go pursuing a detailed solution to everything when the zoning board has two hands on the wheel with the variance request. And if it's not granted, it would be an utter waste of time. And we know that those issues are going to be further flushed out where appropriate. The one-way street, that's not even a planning board issue. That is a city issue. We're willing to work with the neighborhood on that. But the issue of utilities and parking, those will get reviewed by the planning board. But the planning board is not obligated to approve this either. If we can't, so I feel like it's important for you guys to trust them to deal with any of the salient pieces of relating to parking and traffic and utilities under their discretionary permit that's needed before this project can even move forward. And
Actually, I couldn't agree more, which is why I think spending a lot of time on that this evening, rather than taking that to the planning board, was perhaps not the time best spent, and sets an expectation with the neighborhood that those are issues that we really have purview on when we don't. I have another question which has to do with our role as to the variance. I really do appreciate you saying earlier that you have an alternative by right without a variance, which is to take your two-family condominium and expand it. And you went into some detail about, unit 1 could be 1895 square feet, unit 2 could be 1441 square feet. You could do a deck and parking and all the rest of the stuff. Given that you have an alternative, what to do with a two-family use, we have to decide whether there is a hardship here where you really don't have an alternative. In what way do you have a hardship where you're unable to move forward without us essentially waiving something the city council has, from my perspective, fairly recently put in place?
yeah, the answer to that is I've not presented that the applicant has a by right or an as of right alternative. What I have said is there is the ability, one would like to think, I think so, to add an addition such as the one I had on the screen in the presentation. And the two-car garage, I think, can be done as of right, but that's it. You'd need to get a special permit for non-conformities under 9B3 to do the 500 square feet or less per unit, which that would fit within with the two-car garage underneath. And again, it's just a facsimile, it's just an alternative, but that is not as of right. It requires no zoning relief in the form of a variance, but it does require a special permit for nonconformities similar to your other projects. So it's still discretionary, it's not as of right. And it's clearly, in my mind, at least as presented, and I still feel the same way, a very suboptimal outcome for everybody involved. And
I should not have used the word of right. You would need a special permit, of course, but not a variance to do that. So getting back to the hardship for a variance here, I mean, a hardship is where you're really limited in what you can do with your land, and you need a variance because if it's unusual shape or topology or slope or soil conditions or something.
Yep.
But in this case, with a special permit, you can expand your existing two-family house. So in what sense, where's the basis for the hardship that you're requesting for variance?
Yes. So the basis to me is fairly clear. It's the shape of the lot and the fact that this property fronts 3 streets. What does that, we all know that now, but what does that mean from a zoning perspective? It means there's no side yard. How many properties do you think are in Newburyport with no side yard? Very, very few. It only has 3 front yards and 1 what would obviously be to most of us, and was for the most of the 200 years this house sat here. This had a side yard next to Dan's house, next to where the new house was built. It's only been a zoning amendment in the last 10 years that's defined the frontage now, the primary frontage for a structure, to be the longest frontage of any streets that a property fronts on. So we can see from the drawing on the screen, Union Place is the winner. And we can also recognize for 195 years that that house has stood there with and without zoning, that the front yard of that house is on Merrimack Street. But no longer does the zoning consider the front yard Merrimack Street. It's now, in the last 10 years, swung over to Union Place, which anybody visiting that site would recognize, well, that's crazy. That's not a front yard, it's the side of the house. But the zoning was changed. Again, zoning is not anything other than a blunt instrument that doesn't always get it right. So then the front yard shifts in the last 10 years to Union Place. So now there's no side yards and there's only a rear yard, which is the old side yard. So we've got a very unique condition where we don't even have a side yard. So, I think this is the conditions of that lot under the shape of that lot and the position of the existing structure and how it was originally designed, and now how the zoning applies itself to that lot, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It seems to me that is a hardship that's substantial, because we actually meet the side yard for the 190 years it was there, because we have 20 feet from Dan's lot line for that new house. And now we require, as of 10 years, 25. So that's why we're asking for that relief, because this lot is so peculiar. So the lot area, as I said, the only other variance here that's of substance, the lot area, we already have a pre-existing non-conforming two-family use. It's only because the 6C requires, I know I'm repeating myself, but now requires that you meet the minimum lot area to ask for a 6C, that we need that new dimensional relief that's already inherent on the property because it's already a two-family use. So I mean, this is a really unique property. So zoning isn't going to fit it perfectly. And it's your job as a group to figure out if zoning it does fit it right or not, and whether what we say makes sense or not. That's all I can do.
I will say, having visited the property and wound up taking several laps around because you really can't back up anywhere. So I get it that the challenges of Union Place and the neighborhood there. But anyway, I hear your answers. I don't want to ask you to repeat them. So I yield my time to the next person. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Great, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Moving on to Mr. Bennett, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to drill down a little bit more on Mr. Swanton's analysis. So the way I further distill this, if I look at the four criteria that must be met if a variance is to be issued here. The first one is that the lot is unique and has special and unique circumstances. In this case, there's not a question of a doubt that it does. So I certainly adopt your argument in that regard. And secondly, the unique conditions and circumstances of the lot have not been the responsibility or the result of your actions. True enough. And I don't think I think it's fair to say that this relief will not constitute a grant of a special privilege. But then there's one more, and I think this is what I'm trying to struggle with, and I think I can get there on this, because I must say there's much to be applauded about this project, in my view at least. It will restore and enhance an historic building. It will, thanks to your cooperative efforts, improve the neighborhood. And it will add money to the housing stock in this community, which is much needed. So here's the question I'd like you to comment on. The final condition that I'm struggling with is this one. It says strict application would deprive the applicant of reasonable use of the lot in a manner equivalent to the use permitted to be made by other owners of the neighboring land structures or buildings in the same district. Now, I'm assuming that there are lots in the R2 district that have been granted the 6C privilege, and that's what I'm trying to focus on. Maybe I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole here, but can you comment on that?
Well, okay.
Well, first off,
Greg, right? Yeah. So
yeah, do you understand what I'm trying to drill down here on? It kind of follows up on Mr. Swanton's point.
yeah,
You know, I mean, your hardship, you know,
Yeah.
for us to find a hardship, somehow
you
you've got to
got
meet
four
the test that I
criteria,
just
right?
articulated.
yeah, I'll try, Greg, and then if I don't get it, reframe the question and I'll try again. But the fourth criteria, which I think, I don't know if it's number 3 or 4, but there are 4 in there, and you went through the first 3, the uniqueness of the lot, the self-imposed component, and the special privilege. And I agree 100% with your conclusions on those. To me, when I look at whether a strict application of the provisions of this ordinance, I'm sort of looking at the ordinance here, whether it'll deprive Sam and Michelle of a reasonable use of the lot, the structure of the building in a manner equivalent to the use permitted to be made by other owners of their neighboring land, structures, or buildings in the same district. That to me sort of speaks to the Waterfront Marine District rather than the rest of the city. But again, knowing the language of the text isn't always perfect, it does talk about the same district, which is the WMD. And what could be a better example than the guy next door doing the exact same thing on a slightly smaller lot with a lot more spillover problems associated, which we're clearly running into some of the headwinds of that construction project with some of the folks in particular on Merrimack Court. And
yeah, well, I'll stop you there. I was hoping that would be your answer, because that was spot on. You've got a project right next door, which in my view satisfies that fourth criteria.
And to me it does as well. I mean, I think Joel, who's been my point of contact, so just to clarify the whole direct abutter conversation piece, my understanding was that Sam spent time with Dan up on Merrimack Street. The person I've been dealing with is the builder next to where we want to build. So my apologies to Dan for not getting in touch with him directly. But anyway, Joel has built a very fine house that looks, I think, spectacular in that location and will be a great place for somebody to live. But we're hoping to add to that and do it in a reduced form further away from Merrimack Court. But I think
excuse me, I just wanted to, I appreciate your observations on this. I just wanted to clarify one other point. Currently, can you tell me where the occupants of the 2 units now park their cars?
The 2 existing units, meaning
Correct.
Sam, Michelle, and the tenant.
Yes.
Sam's on the line, so he can correct me if I'm wrong, but you can see on this image, I think you're still seeing the screen, right, with the 2 renderings in the site plan.
Yeah.
There's a big parking area in the middle there.
I guess the point is they go down Union Street, don't they?
What do you mean they go down Union?
I mean, they have to
there.
drive down Union Street.
Yes. Yes, they do.
So,
They either have to drive up or down.
right. So,
Yeah.
so we're not
It's an
going to be, you're
existing
not going to
condition.
be adding any additional traffic going down Union Street, except for that one area between where the current parking lot is now to the new garage that you're proposing for 2 cars.
And yes, you're 100% correct. And that driveway and garage is almost across from the, whatever you want to call the wreck across the street. the former dairy. So it's nowhere near Merrimack Court, as everybody can see on the screen.
Okay, and just, I think I understand this. You are proposing, there will be a two-car garage for the existing historic structure building?
No,
correct?
we're proposing to tear down that shed you can see next to the shaded existing
Right,
parking area.
right.
And we're not putting another garage up.
So there'll be no garage there.
No,
Why not?
I don't think they want one right now. And they're willing to come back through the process should they get in the position. Sam and Michelle are staying in the house and don't want a garage, but if they want one, there's room to put one, but they'll have to come back through the process.
Yeah.
And it won't be in the same location as that pre-existing non-conforming shed. It'll have to move itself away from Dan's boundary when it's torn down and potentially rebuilt in the future.
I was just curious. I mean, I guess it's my own bias about cars parked on a lot where there's room for a garage, which could fit comfortably on the parcel, but I guess that's your call.
I think they'd like one. I just don't know that they want to do it now, given the expense. But they certainly, I think, are interested in doing one later and getting approvals at that time.
Mr. Chair, this is Andy Port.
Hi, Andy.
Hi, could I just add a comment?
Sure.
Thank you. There's lots of dialogue about this application tonight. Some of it directly on the point of the hardship and the request of the relief. Some of it with other context. There's been other 6Cs that the planning board's looked at over the years under the prior set of regulations. I think it's worth noting, though, that if I'm not mistaken, the vice chair at least and the chair of the planning board at present were heavily involved, and the board was involved with the drafting of the legislation that you're being asked to grant a relief from in recent time. And I mentioned that mainly because there was a concern, I think, on their part that the baseline dimensional standards be met, whether that be setbacks or lot size. In this case, the one that's been, I think, maybe a focus tonight. So I think in essence, one of the things you're being asked to do is to remove one of those criteria before the planning board, the primary permit granting authority, would have the ability to look at the application. That's up to you, of course, as a board, as to whether or not there's a hardship involved and whether or not the relief should be granted. But I note that the board itself that the application would be going to after this would be going there with relief from a provision that they had requested the city council to adopt and that the council had adopted relatively recently relative to dimensional standards. Irrespective of whether or not the use is there as a two-family, the 6C section talks to multiple residential structures on a lot, and the planning board's concern over time, at least in recent time, and in some instances where they were denied 6Cs, has been on the basis of incompatibility based on dimension, setbacks, or the location of a structure.
Okay.
May I address a question to the chair?
Certainly. Go ahead.
Rob, I'm just curious. I mean, are we clear? Maybe I misunderstood Andrew, and maybe I certainly don't know the nuances of what we're dealing with here. But Andrew, well, I'll ask you, Rob. Is there any question that the Zoning Board of Appeals cannot grant a variance from the 6C criteria?
Well, no, we're being asked to grant a variance. We're being asked to grant dimensional control variance. So it's
which is
controls.
That's
within our purview. What I believe the applicant is saying is that strategically, Mr. Cracknell and his clients have chosen to pursue this relief as logical predicate, so that when they go to the planning board, there's a context for what they must ask for next. And it certainly bears some rational reason. So I understand it as just one member. What Mr. Port is saying is that if this board were to grant that relief, there is the curiosity factor, I'll call it, that the board that will receive the application's next progression will be a board who was members of which were involved in the drafting of the very ordinance we granted relief from. But therein lies the dichotomy of what we do as a dynamic alchemy of citizen appointed member boards. You know, we have disparate discretion. Some of it overlaps, some of it doesn't. And, you know, we hope that in the best efforts of fair-minded members that we come out with something better than we went in with. And sometimes we hit that right and sometimes we hit that wrong. But I think that from our standpoint, we must look at this within the four corners of what we have. And we have to try to resist the temptation to wonder what it will seem like wherever it might go next. Because again, they too will have to just look at it within the four corners of what they have. This is our discretion. We do have those powers. Those are scripted powers that we possess, and setting aside, you know, any sort of politic piece of it. You know, I believe we have to try to take as sterile, a credible, you know, view at all of this as we can.
That's helpful. And I guess that was what I was trying to get clear in my mind, to what extent any decision we make tonight can be informed beyond the strictures of the requirements to issue a variance.
Well, they resonate, you know, Mr. Bennett. I mean, I think it's a fair thing to just point out, everything we do as a board of discretion. You know, we're an appellate board. So essentially, all we do is make exceptions to the rules. That's our entire function. We grant relief. You know, that's our role, is to grant relief if it's in the cards to do so. We evaluate the granular and try to grant relief if it meets with our sense of, you know, balance and compliance. So I think as human beings in the world, it would be illogical to imagine us not taking to bear all of our respective education, training, background, and experience. I don't think we can't do this business, you know, robotically. So I think that we have to consider everything. But in terms of evaluation, we also must run it through the lens of the criteria. Whether it's met in our minds is more of a subjective thing, but the objective thing is the criteria. So we do that with all that we bring to the table, each of us. So with that,
Hey, Rob, could I just say one thing about about the process?
Well, I'll tell you, Mr.
Okay.
Cracknell, and I want to say this respectfully because I have a great deal of respect for you. We have one more application.
Yeah, okay, got it.
But I do want to make sure that we move things along. So I will say, with that in mind, you know, I'll certainly not, you know, tell you no, but just please, you know, exercise the greatest sort of care of the ground we've already covered and the ground we have yet to cover, to try to move through this, if you could.
I would just add, if it isn't already obvious, we are not assuming the planning board, should we get through this process, is just going to rubber stamp this special permit that they've got to issue. If there's issues with incompatibility of what we're proposing to the surrounding context and the character of that neighborhood, they have ample latitude and discretion to deny our application if in fact these issues, some of which are tangential to what you're looking at, traffic, parking, one-way streets, if that's something that they choose to review as part of their application and feel we have not met the standard, we obviously know this project will not be moving forward, even if you support it.
Fair enough. Was that it, Nick?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so where are we still in questions? I believe we are. Okay, so Mr. Bennett, I believe you had the floor. Did you have further questions?
I've exhausted my questions.
Very good. Well, I appreciate that. So with that, I certainly don't have any additional questions that haven't already been fleshed out. So I appreciate everyone's patience with that. I'll close this portion of the public hearing and we will go to deliberations. And certainly with that, we as a board must, we can speak sort of en masse about all of the presentation. But as we deliberate, we do need to deliberate around the criteria of variance. So the underlying criteria met on lot area, rear yard setback, as well as front yard setback, which is the add-on offered by the planning department. And then the special permit for non-conformities on the expansion of a pre-existing non-conforming structure. So with that, I will, let's kick things off. And Mr. Moore, you can take them in whichever order you feel is appropriate, or collide them together. But you can lead us off here, if you please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to instead of hitting one by one, I'm going to hit with the one that I'm struggling with the most. And it's the hardship and the strict application would deprive the applicant of reasonable use. And I say that because there was an unfleshed out granted alternative A to make this work and to have reasonable use of the property as is, without asking for another structure to be placed at the narrowest end of a unique lot that would eat up a lot of space and cause variances to be required. So I'm not totally convinced that hardship has been proven, and especially given the nature of the process right now with the new requirements for this with 6C. I'm not there yet. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think for the purposes of everything that we've heard tonight and from the applicant, from the members of the public that spoke both for and against the project, and through the questions that we as a board have asked of the applicant, I think that for the purposes of where we are, I believe that we as a board have the ability to grant a variance as sought by the applicant as we review this application. And I do feel as though the 4 criteria are met. And with regard to the item number 2 of the 4 criteria, the strict application of the provision of the chapter would deprive the applicant of reasonable use of the, I guess in this instance, it's the lot, but it goes on. It doesn't end at the word lot. It goes on, the reasonable use of the lot equivalent to the use permitted to be made by other owners of their neighboring lands, structures, or buildings in the same district. So it's not, I don't think it's enough just to say that we have, there's an alternate plan that was proposed. I do think that the fact that a year or so earlier, or in 2019, similar relief was granted to the next door neighbor really does carry some weight. And I also think that, there have been some other applications that have come through where we as a board have said, oh, wouldn't 6C be great? So we don't have a 200-foot long barn structure running down a narrow lot, or a staple of 2 houses together. So I do think that this is a unique project that that has been presented to us that makes good use of a narrow lot with 2 different buildings, and they do have basis to satisfy the 4 criteria, to show the hardship, and to, in my mind, satisfy the fact that we're not nullifying or substantially derogating from the intent of 6C as it was recently amended by the city council. We are the body that grants variances, and I think here we have enough to grant the 3 variances that they are seeking, as well as the special permit for the 500 additional square feet. As there's no new non-conformity that would be created after the granting of the variance, and that you have this lot that's nearly 1,500 square or 15,000 square feet, 1380, I think, or something like that. And you're setting this other building at the very other end of the lot, so there's adequate space there, and I think that you're not going to run into, in in my opinion, you're not going to run into density issues with regard to the second building. So that being said, I am in support of this project. I think it's a nice looking project. I think it makes a lot of sense with respect to what it gets the city as well. And what it, you know, the
Did,
Can you hear me?
yeah, we can.
Sorry, I lost my speaker somehow. I talked too much and the battery went.
So that being said, I can support the project.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Let's go to Mr. Swanton.
Yes, I'm glad I'm not on a battery here. Not that I'm going to speak long. I agree with my previous two colleagues. This is a challenging project. I don't see a lot of these. When Mr. Moore spoke, I concurred with him a lot. If this was a special permit in front of us, it'd be much easier for me. The fact that it's a variance means in my mind, I have to convince myself that we're depriving this person of a reasonable use of their land. And as it's already been said, there is another use of the land that doesn't require a variance. So it's hard for me to make that case. Now, Mr. Delisle pointed out that next door in 2019, something happened and maybe there's precedent there. I was not on the board in 2019. I've been on for 2 years. I don't know exactly what happened there. Of course, that sounds like it was before the city council further tightened the rules to which we now have to hold projects and consider variances. So if I understood that better, I might be in a position to support this, but not knowing the specifics there and what were the rules then and what are the rules now, and is this really a variance and is there a hardship? I'm having a hard time tonight getting behind approving a variance for this project. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Bennett.
Mr. Delisle accurately and succinctly articulated what I was trying to drive at in my colloquy with Attorney Cracknell. And I agree that all of the 4 criteria have been met. And I think it's important to emphasize that with respect to this critical test criteria that we're looking at, I don't believe it's necessarily appropriate to look simply at what can be done at this property itself, but the statute requires us to see what has been going on to neighboring land structures, buildings, and lots. And therefore, the mere fact that this applicant could do something else on the property does not really satisfy that criteria. At least that's how I read it. I believe that's how my colleague, Mr. Delisle, read it. But nevertheless, this is a complex. We've been handed a few complex issues tonight. But I would support this. I find the criteria for a variance have been met. And furthermore, I find that the criteria for this special permit for non-conformities have been met. And not only that, this project, as it has been described to us this evening, reflects thoughtful, positive development for this neighborhood and the openness in which the applicant has sought and will continue to seek to work with the neighbors is laudatory. So for all those reasons, I would grant the requested relief sought here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bennett. I echo the comments and I think the sentiments of my colleagues. I believe Mr. Moore, Delisle, and Bennett, and certainly not to leave you out, Mr. Swanton. I think that this, for me, is just the first of multiple steps. There's a great deal of scrutiny yet to come, and I think the principal scrutiny will be under 6C, which is the governance, and that's the domain of the planning board, who happen to also be some of whom were principal authors in the most recent version of the ordinance. So I think this is really for us, an initial step, but by no means the last step. I do think that I feel the applicants have put together a very detailed presentation from my standpoint. And my hope is that they continue to work with the neighbors to find the right result, if there is one to be had. But I certainly think that looking at it just very much through our lens, that the criteria I feel appears to have been met. Whether it meets with favor at the next levels remains to be seen, but I think it at least deserves it deserves to advance for that further scrutiny and see if it is in the cards for this application. I think the preservation of the property is certainly very attractive. I also understand that the applicants live in the world, so trying to be creative and empathetic and sensitive to fund that is a difficult process. So I commend everyone for their patience and their time and their presentation, but I as a member feel like I too can support it for those reasons. Any other deliberations by any member of the ZBA before we close that and move on? Seeing none, I'll close the deliberations portion of the public hearing, and at this point we will move this to a motion. If there is a motion to approve, and let's please take them separately. So if I can have, let's begin with the variance, docket 21-3 for lot area, rear yard and front yard setback on 344 Merrimack Street. Do we have a motion to approve?
Greg Bennick, I will move to approve variance application number 21-3 for 344 Merrimack Street.
Thank you, Mr. Bennick. We have a second.
I'll second that.
Mr. Delisle, thank you. Motion's made by Mr. Bennick and seconded by Mr. Delisle on the variance application 21-3 for lot area, rear yard and front yard setback. Calling the roll. Mr. Moore.
No.
Mr. Moore is no. Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle is yes. Mr. Swanton.
Not tonight. If I had more time to think about it, but not tonight. No.
Mr. Swanton is no. Mr. Bennick.
Yes.
Mr. Bennick is yes. I too would vote yes. Unfortunately, though, that is 3 in the affirmative, 2 in the negative. The motion fails, and so that application is denied. So moving to the next application on the special permit for non-conformities. Let me ask, before we take a motion, I'm going to pause for a moment. Mr. Cracknell, do you want us to proceed with the vote on the special permit for non-conformities?
Is there any point?
Well, I mean, the completion of the process, or we can, we'll certainly entertain a withdrawal, or whatever you wish to do. I just don't want to.
Well, if given board member Swanton suggested he wished he had more time, and I totally appreciate the fact that a lot of this information might have sounded new, and some of it was. Is there any opportunity for this to be continued and potentially reheard with a motion to reconsider what you just did in order for us to continue to work with the abutters, take all your comments from tonight and come back at a subsequent meeting? Because we'd be willing to do that.
So here's where you are on that. And this is why, this is where we're beholden to the Roberts Rules of Order, which is our sort of governance, but they are modified. But under the rules of order, we have that first application on the variance, which was not successful. A member in the majority can make a motion for reconsideration, at which point that matter gets placed onto the table. And if seconded, we would have another vote for reconsideration, and that reconsideration could then be to entertain a continuance. but that has to be, since I voted in the minority.
Yeah, I
and
understand. Yeah.
Lyle voted in the minority, and
So I would respectfully request member Swanton to consider making such a motion so we can.
actually, you know what? My apologies. The majority vote were the yes
Oh,
vote.
yes,
were
yes.
insufficient. So the majority vote were yes votes. They were insufficient, but I'll entertain a motion by any member of the ZBA for reconsideration. But I can simply only ask, and if there is none, there is none. If there is one, then I'll proceed. Any member of the ZBA wish to make a motion for reconsideration to roll back the vote we just took on variance and consider a continuation for further refinement, which is certainly something we've done, though we've never really gone this far and then had to rewind, but it's within our ability to do it if we so choose.
I will so move, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bennick's motion for reconsideration is made. Do we have a second?
I'll second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. So the motion for reconsideration of the board's vote on the variance application 2123 is made by Mr. Bennick and seconded by Mr. Delisle, is now on the floor for a vote. Calling the roll. Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
I just want to clarify that I'm not here. I don't need more time just to think about it. I need to do some research and ask some questions about some things that were new tonight that I did not understand. With that, I will vote yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Bennick.
Yes.
And Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative on the motion for reconsideration. The ayes have it. The motion carries. So that matter for reconsideration is now approved. That has rolled us back. So at that point, Mr. Cracknell, do you wish the board to entertain a continuance? And if so, how long would you like? And it would be a continuance on both applications.
Well, let's go with at least 30 days and I'll do my best to respond. If we need a continuance in 30 days, I'll request it at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Cracknell. So having heard from the applicant with respect to the time, do we have a motion for a continuance? And let me see, Caitlin, what is 30 days would give us the first meeting in February? No, I'm sorry, would give us the last meeting in January.
So the last meeting in January is January 25th.
January 25th. Any member contemplate a conflict or an attendance issue for the 25th? Okay. All right, so that's January 25th. Do we have a motion to continue this application? And we can make the motion joint as to both matters, the variance and the special permit on 344 Merrimack Street, to continue both matters to the hearing of January 20, was it 25th? I'm sorry.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Ken Swanton.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton.
Seconded, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. On the second, motion's made and seconded on the continuation of the matters, both applications to January 25th. Calling the roll, Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Mr. Delisle.
Yes.
Mr. Swanton.
Yes.
Mr. Bennick.
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries. Both matters are now continued to the hearing of January 25th. And thank you for your patience, for the detailed presentation. And I know it's a late hour, so we will look forward to seeing you back on the 25th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and sorry to put everybody through that. Thank you.
Part of the process.
Yeah.
Thank you all members of the board. I really appreciate your time.
Very good. Okay, moving on to our last application this evening. This is the application for a special permit for non-conformities, docket 21-9 by Rob and Christine Padalaro, care of Lisa Mead, Tallerman and Costa LLC. The address is 23-25 Overlook Street in Newburyport, Plum Island. The applicant seeks all necessary permits, approvals, and special permits to remove the pre-existing non-conforming home and construct a new single-family home on the property. With that, may we hear from the applicant. Attorney Mead, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the board. Hang in there. I don't have 42 slides. So I am here this evening with Kristen Cutter and Rob Padalero. I misstated Kristen's last name in our cover letter, so I apologize for that. And the son and partner of the owners of the property, Mr. and Mrs. Padalero, for the property at 23 to 25 Overlook. Rob and Kristen are proposing to remove the pre-existing non-conforming home. You can go to the next slide, please, Caitlin. And construct a new single-family home on the property, which is designed by Eileen Graff, who is also here with me this evening. The property, other than the lot area, will meet all of the dimensional requirements of the ordinance once removed and the new property, excuse me, the new structure proposed. So the property is in the R3 and PIOD district. The single-family home has 2 bedrooms. And it was existing and built in 1920. We have been in front of the Historic Commission, who has lifted a demolition delay for this proposal and found it not to be historically significant or preferably preserved. The lot is non-conforming for lot area, as I said, at 9,750, where 12,000 are required, but has conforming frontage of 130, where 120 are required. The existing structure is also non-conforming for front setback of 6.4, where 20 is required, and right setback of 1.6, where 20 is required. The remaining dimensional requirements for the existing structure are met. So if you could go to the next slide. You can see here from this slide, the existing structure is in the bottom right-hand corner of the property. And as you can see from the proposal is to put the brand new structure in the middle of the property. If you could go to the next slide. So here are the existing conditions of the architectural drawings on the property. As we kind of go through these next slides, which are photographs, I want to point out to you that the existing structure doesn't meet any of the current FEMA or Conservation Commission standards. Many parts of the house, the ceiling height is below acceptable standards for current construction or the building code. For example, the ceiling height above the kitchen sink is 5 feet 6 inches, and the bath ceiling averages 6 feet 2. The bedroom have ceilings of 6 feet 2. Also, the structure lacks a proper foundation. It's currently wood on sand. And as a result, there's a slope of 7 inches over 16 feet in the kitchen and dining room. So if you want to go to the next slide. And Eileen, if you have anything to pop in on any of these slides. So as you can see, this is a traditional Plum Island cottage. Next slide, please. What I think is really interesting about these slides that have the fences in, these fences are essentially 6 feet tall, depending on where they are. And so you can see how short the house actually is on these exterior walls. Next slide, please. And you know, there you can see the construction of the additions that were put over. It's actually really hard to tell what the original cottage was versus what the additions are. Next slide, please. And here in particular is the fence at the front drive, which is 6 feet. And so you can tell that really these sidewalls are only 8 feet tall on the exterior. Eileen, is there anything you want to add about these existing photographs? Eileen, are you there? Maybe. Mr. Champetti, do you see Eileen in the audience?
I do. Her microphone is muted. She is present, but she may be away from her computer.
Okay, so.
Yeah, Eileen, we've asked you to unmute on your end. From our end, it appears unmuted.
So maybe while she's trying to come on board here, I know that she's actually out of state right now, so maybe there's a little issue there. We'll go to the next slide, which continues to show, you know, the window treatment and the essential, just the historical summer cottage that doesn't meet any of the current requirements, either for building construction standards or the FEMA requirements for the island. Next slide, please. So the proposed conditions are to construct a new single-family home in place of the existing home. The home will be constructed in accordance with the current FEMA requirements. The lot will retain, obviously, the 130 feet of frontage, and where it will meet all of the pilot setbacks of 20 feet or more. The front yard setback now will be conforming at 25.1. The right side will now conform at 45. The left side will be conforming at 38. The rear setback will be conforming at 23.4. The lot coverage will be 12.5%, where 20% is the maximum. The building height will be 33, where 35 is the maximum. The open space will be 76.4%, where 35% is the minimum. There will be space for at least two cars to park. And the FAR will be at 0.217, which is under the maximum of 0.25. I think I saw Eileen pop up there. Eileen, are you back with us?
I think that's just Andy has promoted her to the panel. So you should see her now, but her microphone's still muted on her end. If you want, Attorney Mead, if you want to just maybe just walk us through what you can.
Yep. So I'll just keep going.
And then we'll just hope for toward the end that everything will come online.
Right. So as a result, other than the lot area, all of the requirements of the PIOD will be met. And so if you can go to the next slide, please. So I'm not going to do these justice, but as you can see in this drawing, all of the conditions of the FEMA requirements are met. The lowest living area is above the floodplain, and there is it's on pilings, so it meets all of the current floodplain requirements and the conservation standards. I will tell you that this actually is also being introduced into the Conservation Commission, probably the beginning of February. I don't think we're in before that, but it will have to go to the Conservation Commission as well. So you are the second step in the road to the permitting process. The next slide, please. So the conditions of the ordinance, as we said earlier in the evening, are that not only is it not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, but also it is not substantially more detrimental to the overlay district. Here, the proposed structure is built in accordance with all the FEMA and Conservation Commission standards. It will be a much more livable structure than the existing seasonal cottage and meet all the building code requirements. Importantly, one of the purposes of the PIOD is to reduce damage to persons and property associated with flooding and cleanup thereafter. And of course, having it built in conformance with the FEMA standards helps to meet that requirement. Contrasting the proposed structure with the existing structure, it's clear the proposed situation is more beneficial to the PIOD than the neighborhood than the existing structure, allowing free flow of sand and air and water underneath the pilings if necessary. The proposed structure is well elevated off the ground and compliant with the standards, as I've noted, and obviously meets the ceiling heights and will have level floors, we hope, and meet the building code requirements. And as I noted also, it entirely meets the dimensional requirements other than the lot area, which we are not changing and don't have any control over. I would also note that the applicant has received 4 letters of support, which we have provided to the board earlier than this evening regarding the proposed structure and special permit application. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Mead. We'll close that portion of the public hearing. And wait a minute, it looks like Eileen's microphone is unmuted. Did you want me to?
Yeah, maybe she could talk about the structure and the materials and things of that nature. That would be great.
Okay, Eileen, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, great. Just in time. I
Great.
believe Attorney Mead was turning over to you the structural component of the presentation. So we'll just we'll keep this open and hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry about the technical difficulties. So in front of you, you're looking at the exterior elevations, and to simply describe this new structure that's going to be placed in the middle of the lot. We are running perpendicular to 70th Street. So this top left drawing is the elevation we're going to see as we approach the house coming in from 70th, from Northern Boulevard. So this will essentially be the front. The structure is approximately 25 feet by 39 feet long, with a little bit of deck space on both ends. It is, as Lisa mentioned, up on piles to meet FEMA requirements, with parking happening below. We will have items like condensers, etc., placed on cantilever platforms to help meet Conservation Commission requests. And we will have sort of a typical kitchen, living, dining space on the first floor, and it will be a 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath home for Rob and Kristen. It's going to be sided with shingles and architectural shingles on the roofing. We will have, windows that meet the energy code, double hungs, as you see, 2/1. So trying to create sort of a coastal look to the home. We have some cantilevered areas to help for different conditions, such as shading, as well as sort of adding dimension and interest to the building, with some larger overhangs at the roof level as well, again for the same conditions of some providing good shade relief from the sun out there, as well as sort of visual interest with some shade and shadowing. So that is the house from the exterior point of view. As Lisa mentioned, we are below the 25% FAR. We're only at 21.7%. The house is only 2,114 square feet. So increasing it only at 973 square feet from what the existing property has currently for FAR. So again, just, still under the 25 as the limit. But Rob and Kristen see this as the home that they will, reside in and raise their family in. So with close proximity to Rob's parents as a butter, and they're hoping to get permission to build this, but they're quite excited about this project.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Kraft. Attorney Mead, was there anything further before we move on? Great.
No, I think that's it. We're happy to entertain your questions.
Thank you. We'll close that portion of the public hearing and we'll go to public comment. Anyone who wishes to speak in connection with the application, I'll just ask you to raise your hand, bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll recognize you and we will hear from you. Seeing that we only have 9 attendees that aren't board members, I don't see any hands raised. Going once, going twice. I will close that portion of the public hearing. We'll go to questions from the board, beginning with Mr. Moore.
One quick question, probably apropos nothing here, but the open space under the building, is that for parking?
That is correct, yes. So the 2 centered bays would be for parking, and the spaces underneath this say left and right, just openness. Due to that area, we will not have, in terms of flood zone, we will not have any skirting in underneath this building. So it is as shown on these drawings.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Delisle.
I don't have any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton.
Yeah, I visited this today. It's a pretty good sized lot. It improves the setbacks. Doesn't have any density issues with the FAR. So I also don't have any questions.
Very good. And Mr. Bennett?
I have no questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett. I too have no questions. I think the presentation was pretty detailed. I'll close that portion of the public hearing. We'll go to deliberations, and as we deliberate, we'll deliberate around the criteria of special permit for nonconformities, beginning with Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Champetti. Again, thorough presentation, much improvement to the PIA just in getting things to FEMA requirements. So I first of all, it actually improves most of the nonconformities originally, except one as presented. So no new nonconformities as he tries to speak English after 11 o'clock. Secondly, more detrimental to the PIA or the neighborhood. I can't see this upgrade and the plans as presented being more detrimental to the PIA with respect to size, scale, and massing. So I can support it.
Very good. Mr. Delisle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll agree with Mr. Moore. I can also support this, and I think that he hit all the points. So I will end there.
All right, Mr. Swanton.
I agree. It's a good example of building on Plum Island. When you have a big enough lot, you can do a lot with it. And I can support this.
Thank you, Mr. Swanton. Mr. Bennett?
I echo my colleagues' remarks, and I support the project.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I share those sentiments. I think the lot size is what makes the difference, and the appropriate scale of this fits in with the size of the lot. And I think that all matters. So I too can support it. We'll close that portion of the public hearing. And thank you all for your comments and your deliberations. With that, do we have a motion to approve?
Some more here. I'll make a motion to approve a special permit for nonconformities for 2325 Overlook Street, which is ZNC-21-9.
Second, Ken Swanton.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, and thank you, Mr. Swanton. Motion's made and seconded on the motion to approve. Calling the roll. Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Delisle?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Rob Champetti, I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. The motion carries. And the application for a special permit on 2325 Overlook Street is approved. Thank you,
all
Attorney
very
Mead
much.
and Ms. Graff, and for the Padularos for your patience. I know that you waited a long time for your application. Have a great evening and Happy New Year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You too.
Take care.
All right, members of the ZBA, we will close the public hearing portion of our agenda this evening and move to the business meeting, which really consists of approval of the minutes that Gretchen has provided us from 12/14/21. Any comments, revisions, or modifications to the minutes?
I move we approve the minutes, Ken Swanton.
Seconded, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Motion's made and seconded for the approval of the minutes as written. Calling the roll on the approval. Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Swanton? I'm sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Delisle. Mr. Swanton?
Sorry.
That's okay. Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That's 5 in the affirmative. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Minutes are approved. I have no updates as chair other than this was a long one. Thank you all for your patience and obviously for your service. I know I'm sure you're all wondering why is it I do this again? But the city needs you, and this board needs you. So I just, as a humble member, thank you for all your patience, and it's clear that everybody pays attention a lot. Andy, I'm going to ask a leading question. You don't have any updates for us this evening, do you?
No, with the one little caveat that you and I think are familiar with, and some board members may recall, and it's ironic, actually, I feel like that I'm mentioning it, but the possibility that you might be expected to handle hearings for short-term rental units in the new year. And so just that you might want to monitor that discussion as the city council looks to that in January, not to give you any anxiety, because we think that there's a possibility of not needing a special permit to accomplish their ends, and just leaving it as a license. But that said, you may want to pay attention to that just because it could involve you as a board doing that type of permit as well. Other than that, no, Chair.
All right, that sounds like wasn't qualified, yes, but all right, we'll take that because that's important information, especially if it's going to collide with us. So we'll wait for the new council to be installed, and we'll see where that leads us. But without anything further, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Motion carries. Meeting's adjourned. Hey, have a great holiday and Happy New Year, everyone. And we'll see you in 2022. And Andy and Caitlin, thank you so much for everything you do to kind of keep us dialed in here. It's crazy, 11 o'clock, but I got to commend you. This is ours is not the only board, but thank you.
Maybe we should
Have a
consider
good
a
night.
maybe we should consider a time limit on presentations.
I think I think we should consider a slide limit for sure. If it can be done in 15 slides, I don't think it can be done, you know? And my profession is often justly maligned for saying in 10 words what can be said in 2. So, you know, that's coming from me. We should do something about like cutting a time limit, but we'll deal with that in the new year, guys. Everyone have a great evening and thank
All
you.
right. Happy New Year.
Happy
all.
New Year. Thanks,
All right,
everyone.
Happy New
Yeah.
Happy New Year all.
Cheers. Bye.
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 Bye.